Hey there, tonight we're diving into the perilous life of samurai in the Sengoku period, where loyalty was as sharp as a katana, and survival often meant abandoning the Bushido fantasy for a game of wits and strategy. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. You're in Japan, mid-15th century, and it's anything but a tranquil tea ceremony. The Sengoku period just kicked off, which is essentially Japan's version of the Wild West, but with katanas instead of six-shooters. Forget serene Zen gardens. This is more like living in a never-ending season of Game of Thrones, where everyone is a potential backstabber, and the stakes are as high as a daimyo's ego. Back then, Japan wasn't a neatly packaged nation. Nope, it was split into a chaotic patchwork of territories, each lorded over by a daimyo, a feudal warlord with as much ambition as land, and often more ambition than sense. Imagine nearly 200 of these power-hungry daimyo, each eyeing their neighbors' fields and castles like kids in a candy store, only the candy is rice and strategic strongholds. The central government. Oh, that was just a polite suggestion at this point. Enter the samurai, the warriors who were supposed to bring order to this madness. But let's burst that romantic bubble right away. These guys weren't just wandering warriors with a knack for poetry and cherry blossom appreciation. They were the chess pieces in the daimyo's deadly game, each move potentially leading to glory, or, more often, a grisly end on the battlefield. Speaking of glory, let's talk armor and weapons. Samurai gear wasn't just handed out like party favors. A full set of armor could cost the equivalent of a small fortune. We're talking about a suit of armor worth around 5 years' salary for the average farmer. And that's before you even think about the weapons. A katana might set you back another couple of years' wages. So, unless you were rolling in rice, keeping up with the latest in battle gear could lead to financial ruin faster than you could say seppuku. Economically, being a samurai was a bit of a gamble. Sure, there was the promise of land and power if your lord conquered new territories. But lose a battle, and you might end up losing your head and your family's livelihood. It was a high-risk, high-reward lifestyle, except more often than not, the reward was a myth. And then there's the question of loyalty. We love to think of samurai as paragons of honor, bound by Bushido to their daimyo. But in reality, loyalty was as flexible as a bamboo sword. Samurai could and did switch sides if a better offer came along. Think of it as medieval job hopping, but with more beheadings and fewer LinkedIn endorsements. The economic strain didn't just hit the battlefield. Samurai households felt the pinch too. With the constant need to upgrade their armor and weapons, even the most prosperous samurai could find themselves drowning in debt. And while it might sound quaint to imagine samurai families toiling over ledgers and negotiating loans, it was less charming when the debt collectors came knocking. So, next time you picture a samurai, don't just see the stoic warrior in a lacquered helmet. See the stressed-out soldier, juggling the demands of warfare with the harsh realities of economics, trying to keep his head, literally and financially, in a world that was as unpredictable as it was brutal. Welcome to the Sengoku period, a time when survival wasn't just about martial prowess, but also about navigating the treacherous waters of feudal politics and economics. And let's not forget that survival for a samurai wasn't just about keeping their heads attached to their shoulders. It was also about resisting the gravitational pull of debt that could make even the most iron-willed warrior feel like they were fighting a losing battle. Now, let's dive into the nuts and bolts, or more accurately, the lacquer and leather, of maintaining that iconic samurai armor. Imagine waking up each day knowing you're about to suit up in gear that could easily be mistaken for a medieval credit card bill. A full set of samurai armor wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a commitment, financially, physically, and mentally. We're talking about a suit that could cost the equivalent of several years' wages for a farmer. Picture the samurai's armor closet, not as a wardrobe of endless options, but more like a collection of prized possessions one had to care for meticulously to avoid bankruptcy, or worse, battlefield embarrassment. Armor maintenance was a full-time job, and no, there wasn't a samurai dry cleaner down the street. Each piece, from the kabuto helmet to the Sunny Shin guards, demanded attention. Leather straps needed replacing, lacquer had to be reapplied, and the metal polished to a shine that would blind an opponent faster than any sword strike. And speaking of swords, let's talk katanas. These weren't your run-of-the-mill blades. They were works of art, and priced accordingly. A top-quality katana could set you back as much as a luxury car today. Samurai were often forced to choose between upgrading their weapons and feeding their families. It's a wonder any of them had time for sword practice when they were so busy balancing the books. Now, let's talk about another essential piece of the samurai's life, the horse. These weren't just mounts, they were mobile status symbols. But owning a horse was like having a second child, one that required constant feeding, grooming, and a veterinary care plan that would make modern pet insurance look like a bargain. The upkeep on a horse could easily chew through a samurai's savings faster than a hungry steed through a bag of oats. In an age where rice functioned as currency, feeding your horse could mean the difference between a comfortable life and financial ruin. And let's not forget, rice wasn't cheap. In fact, it was the gold standard of the day. A decent meal might cost you more than a day's pay, especially if you were dining on anything other than plain rice. Throw in a bit of protein, and you might as well be eating your family's inheritance. So how did samurai survive in such financially turbulent times? By becoming masters of adaptation, and not just on the battlefield. Allegiances were as stable as a house of cards in a windstorm. Samurai became adept at reading the political landscape, often switching sides faster than you can say betrayal if it meant a better deal. Loyalty was a luxury few could afford, and the romanticized notion of Bushido, the samurai code of honor, was more PR than practice. Sure, Bushido sounds great in theory. Loyalty, honor, and martial prowess wrapped in a neat philosophical package. But in reality, it was more like an Instagram filter for the ugliness of war. The real samurai code was about survival, plain and simple. In the Sengoku period, a samurai's loyalty was often to the highest bidder. Daimyos were constantly at each other's throats, and samurai were the pawns in their deadly chess games. In this climate, survival meant keeping one eye on your lord and the other on the horizon for better opportunities. It was a brutal, dog-eat-dog world where the only constant was change, and the only certainty was uncertainty. Samurai had to be not just warriors, but also shrewd strategists and negotiators, able to navigate the treacherous waters of feudal politics with the agility of a cat on a hot tin roof. Yet, despite the harsh realities, the allure of the samurai persists. There's a reason why the image of the lone warrior, steadfast in his code of honor, continues to captivate us. It's the romantic ideal that draws us in, a vision of a world where honor isn't just a word, but a way of life. But peel back the layers of lacquered armor, and you find the gritty truth. The samurai were as much survivors as they were soldiers, forced to adapt to a world that was as unforgiving as the steel of their blades. It's a story of resilience and resourcefulness, of men who were as skilled with an abacus as they were with a katana, striving to maintain their status and livelihood in a world that offered no guarantees. And as we continue this journey through the life of a samurai, remember that beneath the myth lies the reality, a reality that was as complex and multifaceted as the men who lived it. And speaking of harsh realities, let's march right into the epicenter of samurai conflict, the Battle of Sekigahara. Picture this. It's October 21, 1600, and the morning mist in Mino province is about to witness a clash that would shape the future of Japan. We're not just talking about a skirmish here. This was the grand finale of the Sengoku period, the ultimate showdown that would decide who gets to call the shots in Japan for the next 250 years. The stage was set with over 160,000 troops from the eastern and western armies, led by Tokugawa Ieyasu and Ishida Mitsunari, respectively. Tokugawa commanded a force of about 88,000, while Ishida's contingent boasted around 82,000 warriors. That's a lot of men with sharp objects in one place, and let's just say, social distancing wasn't on the agenda. Now, if you've ever imagined samurai battles as an elegant dance of one-on-one duels, prepare to have that bubble burst faster than a cherry blossom in a storm. The Battle of Sekigahara was less about individual heroics and more about strategy, alliances, and a touch of good old-fashioned treachery. Forget the image of the lone samurai slicing through enemy ranks like a hot knife through butter. This was a team sport, and the stakes were as high as a daimyo's ego. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shrewd tactician he was, didn't rely solely on brute force. He played the Game of Thrones long before it was cool, ensuring key defections from the western side. Most notably, the betrayal by Kobayakawa Hidaki, who switched sides mid-battle, sealed the deal for Ieyasu. It's like playing chess and having your opponent's knight suddenly decide it likes your side better. As you can imagine, the psychological toll of such warfare was immense. Picture yourself as a samurai, standing in the midst of this chaos, knowing full well that your life could end in an instant, not from a heroic duel, but from a stray arrow or a backstabbing ally. The constant threat of death was less of an abstract concept and more of a daily companion. And how did they cope? Well, let's just say that Zen meditation wasn't just for the monasteries. The samurai had to cultivate a level of mental fortitude that would make a modern-day mindfulness guru look like an amateur. But let's not romanticize their mental resilience too much. The psychological scars were real, and the fear of death wasn't something you could simply brush off. Bushido, the so-called samurai code, spoke of embracing death as a path to freedom, but there's a world of difference between philosophy and reality. It's one thing to muse about mortality under a cherry blossom tree. It's quite another to face it on a blood-soaked battlefield. And then there's the myth of the lone samurai hero, the solitary warrior carving a path through legions of foes. It's a narrative we love, probably because it's as dramatic as it is implausible. In reality, samurai worked within a rigid hierarchy, and teamwork was the name of the game. Battles were won through coordinated maneuvers, not just individual acts of valor. Think of it as less John Wick and more Band of Brothers. The battlefield was a place where social structures were as important as swordsmanship. Orders came down from the top, and even the most skilled samurai was just a cog in the war machine. Sure, there were moments of personal bravery, but if you charged ahead without your unit, you'd likely end up as yet another cautionary tale about the perils of hubris. And speaking of cautionary tales, let's not forget the economic incentives at play. Victory meant spoils, land, and a bump in status, while defeat often meant financial ruin or worse. The samurai weren't just fighting for honor. They were fighting for their livelihoods. But let's be real, it's hard to appreciate the poetry of Bushido when you're knee-deep in mud and blood, wondering if today's the day you meet your ancestors. So next time you think about the samurai, remember them not as lone wolves, but as part of a pack, a complex web of alliances, betrayals, and strategies. The allure of the samurai legend persists, but beneath the lacquered armor and stoic expressions lies the gritty reality of men caught in the relentless churn of history, driven by forces beyond their control, or sometimes their comprehension. The samurai of the Sengoku period were survivors, adapting to a world where the only certainty was change. And as the dust settled on the battlefields, the real victors were those who understood that the art of war wasn't just about wielding a sword, but about mastering the game of life, politically, economically, and psychologically. The Battle of Sekigahara was just one chapter in a long saga of power, survival, and the relentless march of history. And as we continue to explore the lives of these legendary warriors, remember that every myth has its roots in reality, and every legend is born from the struggles of those who lived it. As the dust settled over Sekigahara, the samurai were left in a world that was shifting faster than you could say feudal Japan. The traditional art of war was about to get a tech upgrade, courtesy of some unexpected foreign guests. The Portuguese. These guys rolled into Japan in the mid-16th century with more than just rosary beads and a penchant for spicy food. They brought with them something that would change the face of battle forever: firearms. Now, if you're picturing samurai tossing aside their katanas for muskets like last year's fashion, slow down. The introduction of firearms wasn't exactly met with open arms. I mean, who wants to swap the elegance of a sword fight for the clumsy bang of a matchlock gun? But here's the kicker. These firearms were game changers, offering a way to pierce through armor and end a skirmish before it even began. It was a harsh wake-up call, like realizing your favorite band just went mainstream. Let's talk numbers. When the Portuguese unloaded their first guns in Tengashima in 1543, they were selling for about 2,000 mon, enough to buy you a decent horse. But as demand skyrocketed, the price dropped, making firearms more accessible than ever. By the time the Battle of Nagashino rolled around in 1575, Oda Nobunaga, one of Japan's most ambitious warlords, deployed around 3,000 gunners in a tactical move that would have Sun Tzu slow-clapping from the grave. This wasn't just a battle, it was an infomercial for firearms. Nobunaga's troops used rotating volleys to keep a constant barrage of bullets flying, effectively turning the samurai tradition on its head. It was like watching the first rock concert, only with more blood and fewer groupies. And as the smoke cleared, it was evident, adapt or perish. So what did the samurai do? Well, the smart ones embraced the change, begrudgingly. Armor was redesigned to withstand bullets, and tactics evolved to incorporate gunfire. It wasn't exactly the chivalric romance of yore, but hey, survival trumps style every time. And speaking of survival, those swords weren't going to pay for themselves. Samurai found themselves in dire need of supplementary income, leading to some rather surprising career choices. You see, by day they might be slicing through enemy lines, but by night they were penning haiku like it was going out of style. Poetry wasn't just an art, it was a networking tool, helping samurai curry favor with influential figures and ease the financial strain. The poetic life wasn't exactly lucrative, but it was a lot less likely to get you killed than the battlefield. But poetry wasn't the only side hustle. Some samurai turned to less honorable trades, dabbling in moneylending or even banditry. Think of it as the gig economy before Yuba. It was a world where honor was flexible, and you did what you had to do to keep your family fed and your armor polished. After all, those lacquer coats didn't come cheap. Social mobility for the samurai was a mixed bag. On one hand, the constant warfare meant that skilled warriors could rise through the ranks, gaining land and status as they proved their worth on the battlefield. But on the flip side, the rigid class system meant that many found themselves stuck in a cycle of poverty, unable to climb the ladder no matter how many battles they won. It was a cruel game of musical chairs, where the music was the sound of clashing steel, and the stakes were your very livelihood. And let's not forget the role of patronage in this social climb. A samurai's fortunes could turn on a dime with the support of a powerful benefactor. Imagine being plucked from obscurity by a daimyo who saw potential in your swordsmanship or your poetry. Suddenly, you're not just a foot soldier. You're a retainer with a stipend, a house, and maybe even a plot of land. But before you start thinking this is some rags-to-riches fairy tale, remember, loyalties shifted faster than the tides, and fortunes could just as easily plummet. Samurai who backed the wrong horse in the political races often found themselves on the wrong side of history, and the wrong end of a sword. In this volatile world, some samurai managed to rise above the chaos. Take Toyotomi Hideyoshi, for instance. Born a peasant, he clawed his way up to become Japan's second great unifier, a title as epic as it sounds. His journey from foot soldier to supreme ruler of Japan was nothing short of extraordinary, a testament to the fact that in the Sengoku period, if you played your cards right, you could change the hand you'd been dealt. Yet, for every Hideyoshi, there were countless others whose stories didn't end with glory or power. Most samurai lived and died in obscurity, their lives defined by the whims of fate and the decisions of those above them. It was a tough world, where survival demanded not just skill with a sword, but the ability to adapt to a landscape that was continually reinventing itself. So, while the image of the noble, solitary samurai continues to capture our imagination, the reality was a lot messier. They were warriors, yes, but also poets, traders, and sometimes outlaws. They navigated a world in flux, caught between the romantic ideals of the past and the harsh realities of a future shaped by gunpowder and politics. And as we journey deeper into the life of the samurai, remember that beneath the polished armor and stoic facade, they were as human as the rest of us, struggling, striving, and sometimes stumbling through a world that was as unpredictable as it was unforgiving. The next chapter in their story promises to be just as compelling as we continue to unravel the myth from the man, the legend from the reality. As the samurai world shifted gears from chaos to control, the stage was set for one of the most significant power transitions in Japanese history. Enter the Tokugawa shogunate. Think of it as Japan's version of hitting the pause button on centuries of relentless warfare. After the dust settled from the Battle of Sekigahara, Tokugawa Ieyasu emerged as the undisputed heavyweight champion of feudal Japan. On March 24, 1603, Ieyasu was appointed shogun, a title that wasn't just a fancy name tag, but a declaration of his supremacy. This was the dawn of the Edo period, a time when the samurai had to swap their swords for spreadsheets, metaphorically speaking. With the country finally unified under Tokugawa's iron grip, the samurai found themselves in a peculiar predicament. You see, peace is a beautiful thing, unless your entire livelihood revolves around the art of war. Suddenly, the skills that made you a superstar on the battlefield were about as useful as a katana in a knitting circle. The focus shifted from martial prowess to mastering the bureaucratic arts. Samurai were now expected to be administrators, tax collectors, and civil servants. Imagine going from slicing through enemy ranks to slicing through red tape. And let's talk about the economic realities. If you thought the cost of maintaining armor was steep, wait until you hear about the price of keeping up appearances in Edo. Samurai incomes were based on koku, a measure of rice that was supposed to feed one man for a year. While the top-tier samurai could command hundreds to thousands of koku, the lower-ranking ones often struggled to make ends meet. It's like being paid in loaves of bread today, great for a sandwich, but not so much for paying the rent. The samurai's new role as bureaucrats also meant a crash course in politicking. The Tokugawa shogunate employed a policy known as sankinkotai, a kind of mandatory work from home, except your home was the shogun's court in Edo. Daimyos were required to spend alternate years in Edo, with their families effectively held hostage to ensure loyalty. This kept everyone in check, but it also meant that samurai had to navigate the intricate webs of courtly intrigue. Forget sword fights. This was more like an episode of House of Cards with kimonos. Now, while this might sound like a demotion for our warrior friends, it was actually a golden age, just not the kind filled with epic battles and heroic deeds. It was a period of cultural renaissance. The samurai traded in their swords for calligraphy brushes, composing poetry and engaging in the arts. The famous haiku poet Matsuo Basho, though not a samurai, epitomized this era's shift toward introspection and artistry. Samurai now had to be as adept at arranging flowers as they were at arranging battle formations. But let's not get too carried away with this cultural utopia. The myth of the stoic, honorable samurai persisted, even blossomed, during this time. Stories of loyalty and sacrifice were polished like a well-maintained katana, yet the reality was often as complex as a no play. The Bushido Code became more of a philosophical guide than a practical reality, a set of ideals that sounded great in literature, but were harder to live by when the stakes were no longer life and death. The Edo period, lasting over 250 years, was a time of peace, prosperity, and paradox. The samurai class was caught between the romanticized image of their past and the bureaucratic reality of their present. As the years rolled on, the samurai became more symbolic than practical, their swords more ceremonial than combative. The very essence of their identity was evolving in ways that would have been unthinkable during the Sengoku chaos. Yet, even as the samurai transformed, their legacy remained as potent as ever. The samurai spirit, embodied in words like honor, duty, and stoicism, continued to resonate long after their swords had been sheathed. It's no wonder that the modern image of the samurai remains entangled with myth. We love the idea of the lone warrior, steadfast and noble, even if the historical reality was more complex. It's as if the world decided to keep the movie trailer version of the samurai and skip the gritty drama behind the scenes. As we wrap up this journey through the world of the samurai, it's clear that their story is one of adaptation and resilience. From the blood-soaked fields of Sekigahara to the serene gardens of Edo, the samurai navigated a world in constant flux. They were warriors in times of war and scholars in times of peace, forever balancing the expectations of society with the demands of reality. So the next time you picture a samurai, remember them not just as the icons they've become, but as the complex individuals they were, caught in the crossfire of history, armed with nothing but their wits, their blades, and a code that was as much a myth as it was a guide. The samurai may have put down their swords, but their legacy continues to wield a power that transcends time, a testament to a world where the past is never truly past. Crete, where the Minoan civilization decided to set up shop, is a sun-drenched island that seems to have been designed by the gods themselves to be a postcard. But let's not get too wrapped up in the scenic views. We're here for the juicy historical bits. Nestled in the middle of the Mediterranean, Crete was like that prime piece of real estate everyone wanted a slice of. The Minoans hit the jackpot with geography, strategically plopped between Europe, Asia, and Africa. It was like having a permanent front-row seat to the world's greatest trade show. Now, you may have heard of King Minos and his mythical labyrinth, but let's put a pin in that for now. The real intrigue lies in how these people managed to turn their island into a buzzing hub of commerce without swinging a single sword. While everyone else was busy perfecting the art of the chariot charge, the Minoans were mastering the fine art of the barter. They had a simple philosophy. Why bother with messy battles when you can make a killing on olive oil and pottery? Crete's natural resources were a smorgasbord for any budding civilization. Fertile land, an endless supply of fish, and most importantly, olive oil that flowed like the Nile during flood season. If you think about it, their economy was greased with the stuff. By around 2000 BCE, these folks were producing more olive oil than they could possibly consume, and that's saying something considering how much they loved it. They used it for cooking, lighting lamps, and probably as a moisturizer. Who knows, maybe even the world's first spa treatment. But the real kicker was how they turned this surplus into a trading empire. Their ships became the delivery trucks of the ancient world, crisscrossing the Aegean and beyond. They weren't just peddling olive oil either. They had pottery, textiles, and a knack for metalwork that was the envy of their neighbors. And they knew how to play the game. They'd sail into a foreign port, unload their goodies, and leave with a cargo hold full of copper or tin, essential for making the bronze that kept their society ticking. The Minoans were trading with Egypt, the Levant, and even as far as Sicily. During the height of their civilization, around 1700 to 1450 BCE, they turned Crete into a buzzing metropolis of international commerce. It was like the New York City of the ancient world, minus the skyscrapers and slightly less chaotic traffic. Their capital, Knossos, was a sprawling palace complex that served as the nerve center of their trading operations. It was here that they kept the ledgers, managed the trade routes, and probably threw some epic banquets to celebrate their latest deals. What makes the Minoans fascinating is their approach to power. They weren't into the whole conquer and rule thing. No, they preferred to influence through commerce and culture. They spread their art, architecture, and lifestyle across the Mediterranean without ever needing a standing army. While everyone else was busy building fortresses, the Minoans were busy building relationships. But let's not romanticize too much. It wasn't all sunshine and olive oil. The Minoans were shrewd operators in a world that could be as cutthroat as a Game of Thrones episode. Trade routes were like modern-day shipping lanes, and piracy was a very real threat. They had to be savvy navigators and negotiators, ensuring their ships made it safely from port to port. They might not have had armies, but they certainly had the wits to outmaneuver their foes. In essence, the Minoans epitomized the age-old adage, make trade, not war. They built a civilization that thrived on commerce and culture, leaving behind a legacy that would influence the Greeks, and by extension, Western civilization. So next time you drizzle olive oil over your salad, give a nod to the Minoans, who turned a simple ingredient into a cornerstone of an empire. So, the next time you're savoring that drizzle of olive oil, remember that the Minoans were the original tastemakers, turning a humble ingredient into the backbone of their booming economy. But olive oil was just the appetizer in their trading banquet. Let's dive into the main course, Minoan trade networks, where pottery, saffron, and yes, even exotic monkeys were part of the grand menu. Picture the Minoans as the Amazon Prime of the ancient world, minus the drones, but definitely with a flair for on-time delivery. Their ships, crafted with the kind of precision that make a German engineer weep with joy, zipped across the Mediterranean like it was their personal highway. They were the FedEx, UPS, and DHL of the Bronze Age, ensuring that their goods reached far-flung markets with a reliability that would put modern postal services to shame. Now, let's talk pottery. You might think it's just clay, right? But Minoan pottery was the designer handbag of its time. Their ceramics, adorned with intricate geometric patterns and marine motifs, were not just containers, they were status symbols. Pharaohs and princes alike coveted these pieces, which could fetch a pretty penny on the ancient market. This was around 1700 BCE, when a Minoan vase could have cost you a solid amount of grain or livestock, the ancient equivalent of shelling out for a limited edition sneaker today. And then there's saffron, a spice so precious it was practically worth its weight in gold. Harvested from the crocus flower, saffron required meticulous labor, with thousands of blooms yielding mere grams of the stuff. The Minoans capitalized on this luxury item, trading it with Egypt and the Near East, where it was used for everything from dyeing fabrics to flavoring food. This wasn't just a spice. It was liquid luxury, a small jar of which could be exchanged for metals or timber, commodities necessary for their shipbuilding and metalwork industries. Speaking of exotic endeavors, the Minoans had a thing for monkeys. Yeah, you heard that right, monkeys. Frescoes from Knossos depict these exotic animals, indicating that the Minoans traded with regions as far-flung as Egypt, where monkeys were more common. Why monkeys, you ask? Well, besides making for lively fresco art, they were likely a status symbol, akin to owning a rare sports car today. If you were a Minoan elite, a pet monkey was your way of saying you de-arrived. But the Minoan trade network wasn't just about swapping goods for other shiny things. It was about strategic economic alliances and ensuring a steady flow of resources that kept the civilization humming. They needed copper from Cyprus, tin from Anatolia, and timber from the Levant for their shipbuilding. This was Bronze Age economics at its finest, with the Minoans playing a complex game of resource Tetris to maintain their edge. Yet let's not romanticize this too much. Trade was less like a cozy marketplace and more like a high-stakes poker game. The Mediterranean was rife with piracy, and every voyage was a gamble. The Minoans had to be savvy navigators and skilled negotiators, not to mention having a knack for reading the room, or in this case, the sea. They managed a delicate balance of diplomacy and deterrence, ensuring their ships made it to port not as prey, but as guests. Their economic strategies were as sophisticated as any modern corporation. They diversified their portfolio, so to speak, ensuring that if one trade route hit a snag, say, a pesky pirate blockade, they could pivot to another. It was this adaptability that kept them afloat for centuries, allowing them to dominate the Mediterranean trade scene without ever needing to conquer a single territory. Their influence spread not through force, but through culture and commerce, a testament to the power of a well-oiled economic machine. And while we're on the subject of influence, let's not forget their fashion sense. The Minoans were the trendsetters of their time, with fresher outfits than anything hanging in your closet. Their penchant for colorful, flowing garments wasn't just about looking good, it was about making a statement. These clothes were crafted from the finest textiles, often traded with Egypt and the Near East, where they picked up techniques like weaving and dyeing, skills that turned their attire into wearable art. In essence, the Minoan economy was a complex web of trade routes, strategic alliances, and economic savvy, all wrapped up in a package that was as stylish as it was effective. They turned Crete into a hub of international commerce, setting the stage for what would later become the Greek economic model. So, next time you check out your online cart filled with exotic spices or artisanal pottery, tip your hat to the Minoans. They were the original masters of the trade game, playing it with a finesse that would make any modern entrepreneur green with envy. And remember, this is just a taste of their rich legacy. There's plenty more Minoan magnificence to explore as we sail further into their history. So, as we sail further into Minoan history, let's ditch the spreadsheet of trade goods and dive into the heart of their society. The Minoans weren't just trade-savvy entrepreneurs with a penchant for exotic pets and olive oil. They were also a society of artists, athletes, and perhaps surprisingly, some pretty progressive thinkers for their time. First off, let's talk social structure. Minoan society was like an ancient version of a hip modern startup. Flat hierarchy, everyone wearing multiple hats, and a focus on creativity. At the top of this pre-beta society, you had the rulers, likely a priest-king or queen, who held both spiritual and political sway. But don't picture a bunch of stiff royals with crowns and scepters. The Minoans were more about having a good time than a good war, and their rulers probably led by example, hosting festivities rather than issuing battle cries. The role of women in Minoan society is another spicy detail. Unlike many of their contemporaries, Minoan women had a public presence that would make some modern societies blush. Frescoes show women participating in religious ceremonies, engaging in athletic competitions, and generally being more visible than one might expect for the Bronze Age. This wasn't a society stuck in a caveman mentality. They were strutting their stuff in a way that makes you wonder if they were the original feminists. Speaking of frescoes, these colorful wall decorations were the ancient Instagram, capturing the Minoans' daily life, religious rituals, and of course, their love for nature. Vibrant scenes of dolphins, flowers, and yes, those monkeys again, adorned their walls, transforming their palaces into living galleries. The most famous of these palatial sites, Knossos, was like the Moeme of the ancient world, minus the hefty entrance fee. And let's not forget their obsession with bull leaping. Imagine a sport that involves acrobats flipping over the backs of bulls. It's like gymnastics meets extreme sports, and it was all the rage in Minoan times. This wasn't just for kicks, though. It had religious significance, possibly symbolizing man's or woman's dance with nature or the gods. Now, let's tackle the myth of Minoan utopia. The idea of a peaceful society with no walls and no wars is as appealing as a Netflix binge on a rainy day. But is it true? Archaeological evidence throws a bit of cold water on this idyllic image. Crete might not have been swarming with fortress walls, but that doesn't mean it was all sunshine and olive oil. The Minoans had their share of conflicts, albeit not on the scale of their contemporaries. Some sites show signs of destruction, possibly from internal strife or natural disasters. And let's not forget that while they were busy being the Mediterranean's master traders, they would have needed to defend their shipping routes from the odd pirate attack. So, were they peaceful or just pragmatic? Maybe they were too busy perfecting their pottery to bother with battle, or maybe they simply preferred to let their trade do the talking. In the end, the Minoans were complex, like a well-aged wine or the plot of a prestige TV drama. They crafted a society that prioritized art, trade, and cultural exchange over conquest. Their influence spread far and wide, thanks to their knack for commerce and their artistic flair. But they weren't living in a bubble. They had to navigate the political and economic realities of the Bronze Age, balancing diplomacy with deterrence. Their society was a testament to the notion that you could build power through means other than the sword. So, as we leave the Minoans for now, remember that they were more than just traders with a knack for pottery. They were a vibrant civilization that embraced art, athletics, and a bit of monkey business. And while they may have had some cracks in their peaceful facade, their legacy as cultural and economic innovators remains unshaken. We'll pick up next time with more tales of their architectural genius and the mysterious reasons behind their eventual decline. Until then, keep those frescoes fresh in your mind. So, the Minoans were more than just a society of traders and artists. They were bureaucratic wizards, too. Yes, while they might not have been swinging swords or building massive walls, they were certainly moving mountains of paperwork. You might say they had the ancient equivalent of a startup's HR department. Only instead of dealing with coffee orders and seating arrangements, they were managing a sprawling trading empire. At the heart of this bureaucratic marvel was the mysterious linear, a script. The Minoans decided to keep things interesting by writing in a language that, even today, remains as inscrutable as a toddler's abstract art. Unlike Linear B, which was used by the Mycenaeans and deciphered, Linear A remains one of history's great unsolved puzzles. Imagine trying to read a novel where the author forgot to include a glossary. But that hasn't stopped historians from speculating. Maybe it was a sophisticated system for tracking goods, or perhaps just an elaborate way to keep their grocery list. What we do know is that the Minoans had a knack for organization. Their palaces, like the labyrinthine Knossos, weren't just royal digs but administrative hubs. They were the ancient world's version of a co-working space, complete with rooms for storage, workshops, and even religious ceremonies. Picture the Minoans walking around with clay tablets instead of iPads, meticulously recording inventories of olive oil, textiles, and those all-important monkeys. They had a whole system in place to track trade goods, making sure everything was accounted for, right down to the last drop of olive oil. And speaking of organization, let's talk about their centralized government. Unlike the Mycenaeans or the Egyptians, who were busy crowning pharaohs and kings, the Minoans seem to have a more collective approach. Their political system was less about one person calling the shots and more about a group of elites running the show. Think of it as a boardroom meeting where everyone gets a say, rather than a single CEO dictating policy. This collective leadership might have been one of their secrets to success. By focusing on trade and culture instead of conquest, they built a society that thrived on collaboration. They were more concerned with making sure their trade routes were secure and their storerooms full than with expanding their territory. It's like they were playing a game of civilization where they selected cultural victory over domination victory. Sure, it's not as flashy, but it kept them prosperous for centuries. Now, let's debunk a popular myth: the Minoans as a utopian society. It's tempting to imagine them as peaceful hippies lounging in their palatial gardens, but reality was a bit messier. While there's little evidence of a standing army, the Minoans weren't entirely strangers to conflict. They had to defend their interests in a Mediterranean world as friendly as a shark-infested pool party. And while their palaces weren't exactly fortresses, they were strategically placed for defense against any would-be invaders or those pesky pirates. But how did they keep such a complex society running smoothly? Well, the Minoans seem to have mastered the art of delegation. They had officials responsible for different aspects of governance, from trade to religious ceremonies. It was like a well-oiled machine where everyone had a role to play. This division of labor allowed them to focus on what they did best: trading and cultural exchange. Their bureaucratic efficiency also meant they could quickly adapt to changes. When natural disasters struck, like the catastrophic eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE, they showed resilience. They rebuilt, reorganized, and got back to business. It's a testament to their administrative prowess that they could bounce back from such setbacks. And while we're on the topic of natural disasters, let's address the myth of their sudden disappearance. The romantic idea of a civilization wiped out overnight by a volcanic eruption or tsunami is as compelling as it is misleading. The truth is likely more complex. a combination of natural disasters, economic shifts, and perhaps even social unrest. But the Minoans didn't just vanish. They gradually faded, leaving behind a cultural legacy that would inspire the Greeks and beyond. So, while the Minoans might not have had the military might of their contemporaries, they wielded a different kind of power. They were masters of trade, culture, and governance, creating a society that thrived on cooperation and innovation. Their legacy is a reminder that you don't always need a sword to make your mark on history. Sometimes all you need is a good trade network, a knack for organization, and maybe a few pet monkeys for good measure. And as we prepare to delve deeper into the mysteries of their architectural genius and the lingering questions of their decline, remember this. The Minoans were a civilization that knew the value of a well-organized spreadsheet. They understood that power wasn't just about territory. It was about influence, culture, and the ability to adapt. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigma of the Minoan civilization and uncover more of their fascinating story. As we continue to delve into Minoan society, let's unravel the mystery of their downfall, which is as layered as a Greek baklava. The Minoans, with their vibrant frescoes and bustling trade routes, seemed like they had hit the civilization jackpot. But then, quite dramatically, the curtain fell. So, what happened? Let's pick apart this historical whodunit. First up, Mother Nature may have been less of a nurturing figure and more of a vengeful deity. Around 1600 BCE, the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini, decided it was time for an explosive makeover, a volcanic eruption so mighty it makes your average tantrum look like a hiccup. This wasn't just any eruption. It was a VEI 7-level catastrophe. For context, that's like comparing a firecracker to the 4th of July. The fallout included ash that darkened skies and tsunamis that made the Mediterranean suddenly less inviting for a seaside vacation. The Minoans, with their keen sense for geography, found themselves way too geographically close to this natural disaster. But let's not pin all the blame on volcanology. The Minoan economy, that well-oiled machine of trade and culture, started to sputter. An economic downturn can be as subtle as a whisper or as dramatic as a stock market crash. For the Minoans, it was the latter. The eruption likely disrupted trade routes, cut off supply chains, and turned their thriving ports into ghost towns. Suddenly, all the olive oil and pottery in the world couldn't pay the bills. Enter the Mycenaeans, who were to the Minoans what the Romans were to the Greeks, a younger sibling with a knack for empire building and a taste for conquest. By 1450 BCE, these mainland Greeks had their eye on Crete, and they weren't there for a friendly game of backgammon. The Mycenaeans were like that ambitious intern who comes in and takes over the office. They brought their Linear B script, took over the palaces, and set up shop in Knossos. The Minoans, once the Mediterranean's trade darlings, found themselves playing second fiddle. But why did the Minoans roll over so easily? Perhaps their focus on trade over warfare left them vulnerable. They were the artists, not the warriors, and when push came to shove, they lacked the military muscle to fend off the Mycenaeans. Their palaces, more suited for banquets than battles, couldn't withstand the Mycenaean push. It was like bringing a paintbrush to a sword fight. Yet, let's not forget the internal strife. Natural disasters and foreign invaders aside, there are hints of social unrest bubbling beneath the surface. Archaeological evidence suggests some sites show signs of fire and destruction that might not have been Mother Nature's handiwork. Could internal conflicts have further weakened their society, making them ripe for the picking? It's a reminder that even the most idyllic scenes can hide simmering tensions. So, what can we learn from the Minoans' dramatic exit stage left? For starters, even the most sophisticated civilization can crumble if it lacks adaptability. The Minoans excelled in trade and culture, but when faced with calamities, their lack of military might and over-reliance on external resources spelled doom. It's a cautionary tale about the dangers of putting all your eggs in one economic basket. Moreover, their story challenges the romanticized notion of a peaceful utopia. The Minoans were indeed remarkable traders and artists, but their decline reveals that no society is immune to the harsh realities of geopolitics and environmental change. They remind us that while cultural achievements can leave a lasting legacy, they don't necessarily guarantee survival. In the end, the Minoans were swept into the annals of history, leaving behind ruins that would captivate archaeologists and storytellers alike. Their influence didn't vanish entirely. It seeped into Mycenaean culture and later into the classical Greek world. So, while the Minoans might have exited the historical stage, their echoes remain, a testament to their enduring impact. As we wrap up this jaunt through Minoan history, remember that civilizations, much like individuals, are complex, layered, and ultimately mortal. The Minoans were a bright spark in the Bronze Age, reminding us that even the most glittering societies can face sudden darkness. And as we ponder their rise and fall, we're left with a poignant reminder. The dance of history is as unpredictable as it is fascinating. So, whether you're juggling trade networks or just trying to keep your houseplants alive, take a cue from the Minoans, adapt, innovate, and maybe keep an eye on those volcanic forecasts. Winston Churchill was born into the aristocracy with a silver spoon so big it might as well have been a shovel. He came screaming into the world on November 30, 1874, at Blenheim Palace. Because why not start life in a place that sounds like a vacation home for royalty? His dad was Lord Randolph Churchill, a politician with a flair for the dramatic and an uncanny knack for making enemies, while his mom, Jenny Jerome, was a Brooklyn-born socialite who seemed to have a Rolodex of every influential person in Europe. Now, young Winston wasn't exactly the poster child for academic excellence. In fact, he was more of a poster child for could do better. At Harrow School, he was famous not for his grades, but for his stubbornness and love for all things military. He once wrote home saying, "I have a wonderful idea of the way battles are won," which is cute until you realize he was talking about toy soldiers, not actual military strategy. But don't let his school reports fool you. This rebellious streak would later become the backbone of his leadership style. When it came to his early career, Churchill seemed to have a knack for being in the right place at the wrong time, or maybe it was just the wrong place at the right time. Either way, his life was a series of fortunate mishaps. Take his stint as a war correspondent, for example. He managed to turn a dangerous job into a personal branding exercise. Covering the Spanish-American War, he was nearly shot while observing a battle, a detail he later spun into a thrilling tale for his readers. There's a fine line between bravery and recklessness, and Churchill danced on that line like it was a tightrope stretched over a pit of alligators. Ah, the Boer War, Churchill's own action movie before Hollywood was even a thing. In 1899, while working as a correspondent for the Morning Post, he was captured by the Boers in South Africa. Now, if you think he simply accepted his fate, you clearly haven't been paying attention. He orchestrated a daring escape that involved jumping off a train, hiding in a coal mine, and trekking over 300 miles to freedom. It was the kind of story that makes you wonder if he secretly carried a scriptwriter in his pocket. But here's the kicker. Churchill had the audacity to write about his own heroics, turning his exploits into best-selling books. Let's pause for a reality check. Churchill's ability to escape wasn't just about his cunning, it was also about his connections. Before his capture, he made sure to befriend influential people, which meant that when he vanished, there was a powerful network ready to assist in his rescue. So, while his escape sounds like the stuff of legends, it was also a testament to the power of having friends in high places, or at least, friends with access to telegraphs and railways. Churchill's early life was a cocktail of privilege, audacity, and self-promotion. His aristocratic roots gave him access to a world where connections were everything, and his rebellious school days taught him to question authority, a skill that would serve him well in politics. His time as a war correspondent not only honed his writing, but also gave him a taste for adventure and danger. And his escapades during the Boer War were the stuff of legend, not just for their daring, but for the way he spun them into tales that captured the public's imagination. In short, Churchill was a master of turning life's lemons into the kind of lemonade that gets you elected Prime Minister. So, Churchill had turned his life into a blockbuster before the term even existed. But what happens when the reel of youthful exploits starts to fade? Enter the world of politics, where Churchill's knack for drama found a new stage. His political career began in 1900 when he was elected as a Member of Parliament for Oldham, a position he won not without the help of his last name and a dash of that infamous Churchill charm, or audacity, depending on who you ask. Fast forward to 1911, and our man Winston was appointed First Lord of the Admiralty. If that title sounds impressive, that's because it was. Think of it as being the CEO of the British Navy, just with more epaulets and fewer board meetings. Churchill was tasked with modernizing the fleet, a critical move. As the world edged closer to the cataclysm of World War I, he was instrumental in championing the shift from coal to oil for naval ships, a decision that wasn't just about making ships faster, but also about securing Britain's dominance on the high seas. This was a time when control of the oceans could make or break empires, and Churchill had his eyes set on making sure Britannia still ruled the waves. But as with all things Churchill, controversy wasn't far behind. Enter the Dardanelles campaign, a military operation that was supposed to be a masterstroke, but ended up being a master flop. The goal was to knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war and open up a sea route to Russia. It was a bold plan, and by bold, I mean the kind of gamble that makes you wonder if he should have been a Vegas high roller instead. The campaign ended in disaster, with heavy casualties and no strategic gains. The cost? Over 250,000 Allied casualties, a figure that would haunt Churchill's career for years. Now, let's debunk a myth or two. While many like to paint Churchill as a lone wolf, pushing for a disastrous campaign against the advice of seasoned officers, the reality was far more complex. Yes, he was a driving force, but he wasn't the sole architect. The plan had been approved by the War Council, and hindsight has a way of making everyone look like a Monday morning quarterback. Still, the Dardanelles became the albatross around Churchill's neck, leading to his political exile, or what he would later call his wilderness years. The 1930s, a decade that saw Churchill transform from political pariah to prophetic sage. Or did it? The popular narrative paints Churchill as the lone voice in the wilderness, warning of the Nazi threat, while others whistled past the graveyard of appeasement. The truth, as always, is a bit murkier. While it's true that Churchill had been vocal about the dangers of German rearmament, his foresight wasn't as crystal clear as it's often portrayed. He was indeed concerned, but so were many others. The difference was that Churchill had a megaphone, a platform in Parliament, and a knack for stirring speeches that echoed across the airwaves. In fact, his opposition to appeasement was as much about political maneuvering as it was about genuine foresight. Churchill's speeches in the late 1930s were peppered with ominous warnings, but they were also strategic moves designed to bring him back from the political cold. The British public, still weary from the horrors of the Great War, wasn't exactly keen on another round of global conflict, and many of Churchill's colleagues were more than happy to keep him on the sidelines, where he couldn't rock the boat, or rather, the battleship. But let's not forget the man was a master of reinvention. During these so-called wilderness years, Churchill didn't just sit around nursing wounds. He was busy writing, producing works like A History of the English-Speaking Peoples, which, while not exactly beach reading, was a testament to his intellectual vigor. He also turned his Chartwell home into a menagerie of hobbies: bricklaying, painting, and the occasional dabble in butterflies. Yes, butterflies, because why not add Lepidopterus to his already colourful resume? And speaking of colour, Churchill's knack for alienating colleagues was as vibrant as his political suits. His ability to rub people the wrong way was legendary. He was a man of strong opinions and an even stronger personality, which often led to clashes with those who preferred diplomacy over bombast. His stubbornness and refusal to toe the party line made him a divisive figure, even among his allies. Yet this same bulldog tenacity, sometimes perceived as arrogance, was a double-edged sword that would eventually carve a path back to power. You see, Churchill had an uncanny ability to be in the right place at the right time, again. As Europe hurtled towards war, his warnings began to look less like alarmism and more like prescience. The Munich Agreement of 1938, which promised peace for our time, quickly unraveled, and suddenly Churchill's outspokenness seemed a lot less reckless and a lot more wise. By 1939, when Hitler rolled into Poland, it was clear Britain needed a leader who could weather the storm, and Churchill, with his mix of grit and grandiloquence, fit the bill. And so, like a phoenix with a penchant for cigars, Churchill rose again from the ashes of political obscurity. But let's not wrap this up with a neat bow just yet. The tale of Winston Churchill is far from over, and as the world prepared for the seismic shifts of World War II, Churchill's story was about to enter its most defining chapter. Keep your hats handy, because it's going to be a bumpy ride from political wilderness to wartime leadership. As Europe teetered on the precipice of war, Churchill made his grand entrance onto the stage of history's most turbulent play, a role he'd been auditioning for all his life, with a script he seemed born to recite. May 1940. Britain was staring down the barrels of Nazi guns, and Neville Chamberlain, with his policy of appeasement crumbling like a soggy biscuit, was not the right man for the job. Enter Winston Churchill, the newly minted Prime Minister, ready to shake things up with a dash of bravado and a sprinkle of rhetoric that would echo through the ages. Let's kick things off with one of his greatest hits, the "We Shall Fight on the Beaches" speech, delivered to the House of Commons on June 4, 1940. This wasn't just any old pep talk. It was a symphony of defiance, a verbal middle finger to Hitler, and a rallying cry for a nation on the brink. Churchill's words were more than just inspiring. They were practically an economic stimulus package. Morale skyrocketed, and enlistment rates followed suit. Yet, while the speech painted a picture of indomitable spirit, the reality was a little less rosy. Behind the scenes, Britain was grappling with strained resources and a military that was about as ready for war as a cat is for a bath. The evacuation of Dunkirk, just days before this speech, served as both a miracle and a wake-up call. While some 338,000 Allied soldiers were plucked from the jaws of defeat, they left behind vast amounts of equipment. We're talking 63,879 vehicles and 2,472 guns, enough metal to make a fleet of budget-friendly cars. The narrative of Dunkirk's spirit was romantic, sure, but it also glossed over the fact that Britain's military cupboard was looking pretty bare. Churchill's challenge was to conjure military might out of thin air, or at least from the remnants of Dunkirk's sandy beaches. Now, about those speeches. Churchill's reputation as a wartime orator is well earned, but let's not forget the team behind the scenes. Churchill had a knack for gathering talent, and his speechwriters and researchers were the unsung heroes of his rhetorical success. They were the backstage crew making sure the spotlight hit just right. Churchill's speeches were polished to perfection, the result of late nights and countless drafts. They were the original viral content, sharing the stage with radio broadcasts that turned his words into a lifeline for millions. But oratory alone doesn't win wars, and Churchill knew this. His strategic decisions were often bold, sometimes teetering on the edge of reckless. Take the Battle of Britain in 1940. The Luftwaffe came at Britain with everything they had, like a heavyweight boxer swinging for the knockout. Churchill and his military advisors, however, had a secret weapon: radar technology. The chain of radar stations along the coast provided advanced warning of incoming raids, tipping the scales in favor of the RAF. This was the kind of practical strategy that didn't make for stirring speeches, but saved lives and planes. Yet even Churchill's leadership was not immune to blunders. The Norway campaign of 1940, for instance, was a fiasco of epic proportions. Aimed at securing iron ore supplies and cutting off Nazi access to Swedish resources, the operation quickly spiraled into chaos. Poor planning and execution led to a humiliating retreat, proof that even Churchill's strategic instincts could sometimes lead to dead ends. The campaign's failure was a stark reminder that war wasn't just about bold moves and stirring words. It was about logistics, timing, and sometimes just plain luck. When it came to strategic blunders, The Gallipoli campaign of World War I had already given Churchill a taste of public backlash. Yet the Norway debacle didn't sink him. Instead, it cemented his resolve to learn from his mistakes. Churchill's willingness to adapt was one of his greatest strengths. He was a man who could pivot faster than a politician at a press conference. His decisions were driven by a blend of gut instinct and hard-headed pragmatism, a combination that kept Britain fighting even when the odds seemed stacked against them. On the home front, Churchill faced the Herculean task of keeping the British economy afloat. With the war effort consuming resources faster than you can say, rationing, Britain was financially stretched. The Lend-Lease Act of 1941 was a lifeline, allowing the US to supply military aid without immediate payment. It was a move that not only bolstered Britain's defences, but also laid the groundwork for a transatlantic alliance that would prove critical in the years to come. Churchill's charm offensive with Roosevelt was like watching a master chess player at work, each move calculated to ensure Britain remained in the game. The economic strain was felt by every Briton, from the blackout curtains to the ration books. Food, fuel, and even clothing were rationed, creating a landscape of austerity that tested the mettle of the British public. Yet, in true British fashion, they soldiered on, buoyed by a sense of shared purpose and a leader who made them believe they could endure anything. Churchill wasn't just leading a war. He was leading a nation through its darkest hour, transforming hardship into resolve with the power of his words. As the war dragged on, Churchill's leadership faced constant scrutiny. His decisions were second-guessed by colleagues, rivals, and the public alike. He was as polarizing as he was inspiring, a man whose flaws were as pronounced as his virtues. His sometimes abrasive manner and unyielding conviction could alienate as much as they could attract. But love him or hate him, Churchill was undeniably a force to be reckoned with, a leader whose vision of victory was as clear as it was ambitious. By 1942, the tide of war was beginning to turn. The entry of the United States into the conflict following Pearl Harbor added a new dimension to the Allied strategy. Churchill's relationship with Roosevelt was not just a political alliance. It was a personal friendship that helped steer the course of the war. Their correspondence was a mix of strategic discussions and personal anecdotes, a testament to the human side of wartime diplomacy. Churchill's ability to connect on both levels was a skill that served him well, ensuring that Britain remained a key player in the Allied coalition. Churchill's war leadership was a balancing act between myth and reality, between the iconic speeches that stirred the soul and the gritty logistics that kept the wheels of war turning. He was a master of the grand gesture, yet he never lost sight of the practicalities that underpinned every decision. His leadership was as much about grit and determination as it was about vision and inspiration. As we leave Churchill for now, poised on the brink of the next phase of the war, remember this. In the grand tapestry of history, he was both the weaver and the thread, a man who crafted his own legend while steering his nation through its darkest days. But the story of World War II and Churchill's role in it is far from over. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the complexities of his wartime leadership, exploring the challenges, triumphs, and controversies that defined an era. As WWII drew to a close, Churchill's wartime leadership was already the stuff of legend. But the aftermath of victory can be a fickle friend, and for Winston Churchill, the end of the war marked the beginning of a new battle, one fought not with bullets and bombs, but ballots and ballots. Politics, the real blood sport. In July 1945, mere months after the Allied forces declared victory in Europe, Britain held a general election. You might think Churchill, the man who had practically willed the nation through its darkest hours, would be a shoo-in for continued leadership. Yet, the British public decided to throw Churchill a plot twist worthy of any political drama. Out went Churchill, and in came the Labour Party, led by Clement Attlee. The result? A political gut punch that left Churchill blinking in disbelief. So, what happened? How did Churchill go from national hero to political has-been overnight? Well, it turns out that war-weary Brits were ready for a change. They wanted new policies that focused on rebuilding and welfare, not the same old wartime rhetoric. Clement Attlee's Labour Party promised the creation of the National Health Service, nationalisation of industries, and a fresh approach to social welfare. It was as if the British public collectively decided it was time to swap their wartime Churchill for a peacetime Attlee, like trading a bulldog for a beagle with a plan. But don't count our cigar-chomping, bulldog-faced hero out just yet. Churchill wasn't one to sit around nursing his wounds. Instead, he took to the lecture circuit like a rock star on a comeback tour. One of his most famous speeches during this time, delivered in 1946 at Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri, coined the term Iron Curtain to describe the division of Europe. In his usual dramatic flair, Churchill warned of the Soviet Union's intentions, saying, "From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, an Iron Curtain has descended across the continent." It was Churchill at his finest, combining a strategic warning with a linguistic flourish that would echo through the Cold War era. While the speech earned him plaudits across the Atlantic, back home, it was a different story. Britain was grappling with the aftershocks of war, the economy was in tatters, and rationing was still the order of the day. The British Empire, once the empire on which the sun never set, was beginning to look like a faded postcard from a bygone era. Nations that had once been under British control were itching for independence, and the economic realities of maintaining such an empire were becoming increasingly untenable. It was a bit like trying to hold onto a sandcastle as the tide came in. Yet, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, albeit one with an ever-present cigar, Churchill made his political comeback in 1951. The Conservative Party, with Churchill at the helm, won the general election. Why the change of heart from the British electorate? Well, after 6 years of austerity under Attlee's government, the taste for socialism had soured for some. It was time for a familiar face, with a bulldog spirit, to take the reins once more. But Churchill's second stint as Prime Minister wasn't all victory parades and ticker tape. The realities of a post-war world meant navigating the choppy waters of the Cold War, managing a declining empire, and addressing a domestic economy that was still licking its wounds. The British Empire was shrinking faster than a cheap wool sweater in a hot wash. India had already gained independence in 1947, setting the stage for a domino effect of decolonization across the globe. Churchill, ever the imperialist at heart, found this shift both necessary and deeply unsettling. He was a man of the old world, trying to lead in a new one. His vision of Britain as a global powerhouse was clashing with the stark economic realities of a nation in debt. By the time he returned to power, Britain's economy was facing a balance of payments crisis so severe that it required loans from the United States and Canada to stay afloat. Let's just say his second premiership was less about roaring speeches and more about balancing checkbooks. And then there was the Cold War, a geopolitical chess match where the stakes were nuclear. Churchill's Iron Curtain speech had set the tone, but now he was in the thick of it, working to keep the peace while maintaining Britain's waning influence on the world stage. He advocated for what he called the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom, a partnership that was as much about shared history as it was about strategic necessity. His ability to charm and cajole American leaders was a critical asset, ensuring that Britain, though diminished, remained a key player in global politics. However, Churchill's age and health were catching up with him. By the early 1950s, he was in his late 70s, and his once boundless energy was beginning to flag. He suffered a series of strokes, which were kept secret from the public, because what's a little clandestine health crisis between a leader and his nation? Despite his legendary resilience, the demands of leading a country in a rapidly changing world were taking their toll. Churchill's second term as Prime Minister was a testament to his enduring spirit and political acumen, but it also highlighted the limitations of a leader trying to adapt to an era that was moving faster than a Churchillian quip. As the 1950s rolled on, the world was evolving in ways that even Churchill's formidable foresight struggled to predict. And so, the stage was set for the final chapters of his storied career. Churchill, the man who had once stood alone against the storm of tyranny, now faced the challenges of leading a nation in transition. It was a period marked by both triumphs and trials, as the indomitable spirit of Churchill met the unyielding march of history. But the story doesn't end here. There are more layers to peel back, more myths to unravel, and more of Churchill's complex legacy to explore. So stay tuned as we delve deeper into the later years of Winston Churchill, a leader whose life was as multifaceted as the times he helped shape. As Churchill navigated the twilight of his political career, it's tempting to picture him as a lion at rest, surveying the savannah of his achievements. But even as he slowed down, the world kept spinning, and Churchill's legacy was already becoming the stuff of both legend and scrutiny. Let's face it, when your life reads like a historical blockbuster, everyone's got an opinion about the credits. First, let's tackle the obvious: Churchill's role in shaping modern Britain. The man was practically a human bulldozer when it came to getting things done, despite, or perhaps because of, being a relic of a bygone imperial age. His post-war years tried to reconcile Britain's imperial past with a future where the empire was more of a fond memory than a geopolitical fact. The Suez Crisis of 1956, for example, was a stark reminder that the days of British dominance were slipping away faster than you could say special relationship. Even though Churchill wasn't in office during this debacle, the ramifications of his imperial nostalgia were still felt. Economically, the Britain Churchill left behind was a mixed bag. The war had sapped resources, a financial vacuum that made the post-war years feel like the economic equivalent of a hangover after a decade-long party. The national debt was a staggering £21 billion in 1945, and rationing didn't fully end until 1954. The Britain that had once ruled the waves was now dog-paddling in a sea of austerity. Yet, the social reforms spearheaded during the Attlee government, with Churchill's eventual reluctant acquiescence, laid the groundwork for the modern welfare state. It turns out that even a bulldog can appreciate the occasional bit of social innovation. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, Churchill's controversies. Ah, yes, the man was as divisive as a pineapple-topped pizza. His views on race and empire have sparked enough debate to fuel 1,000 Twitter storms. Churchill was a product of his time, holding views that, by today's standards, would be considered archaic at best and appalling at worst. His role in the Bengal famine of 1943, where up to 3 million people perished, is a dark stain on his legacy. Critics argue that his policies exacerbated the crisis, while defenders claim he was constrained by wartime exigencies. Either way, it's a reminder that not all historical titans wear spotless armor. Churchill's storied career was also marked by remarkable resilience. His ability to bounce back from political oblivion not once, but multiple times, is the stuff of legend. The man was like a human boomerang. No matter how far he was thrown out of power, he kept coming back. This resilience, however, was as much about timing as it was about tenacity. His political comebacks were often driven by a confluence of circumstances, global crises, public sentiment shifts, and a knack for seizing the moment. He was like a historical surfer, riding the waves of change with an eye for the perfect swell. Let's not forget the myth-making machine that Churchill himself fueled. His prodigious writing, spanning everything from historical tomes to his wartime memoirs, crafted a narrative where he was both hero and historian. His 6-volume, The Second World War series, which helped him win the Nobel Prize in Literature in 1953, is as much an account of the war as it is a testament to Churchill's ability to shape his own story. He knew the power of narrative and wielded it like a weapon, ensuring his version of events would echo through the annals of history. And what about those speeches? Churchill's oratory prowess has been lionized, but let's not kid ourselves. It was a team effort. His speeches were the result of collaboration, with advisors and writers helping to polish those legendary words. Churchill's genius lay in delivery. He could make a grocery list sound like a call to arms. His speeches weren't just about rallying a nation. They were about setting the stage for how history would remember him. He had a knack for turning phrases into monuments, ensuring that his words would outlive the man himself. Ultimately, Churchill's legacy is a tapestry woven from threads of triumph and tragedy, heroism and hubris. He was a leader who stood up to tyranny with an iron resolve, and yet stumbled over the complexities of a changing world. His life was a testament to the dualities of human nature, the capacity for both greatness and fallibility. Churchill wasn't a saint or a sinner. He was human, with all the contradictions that come with it. As we reflect on Churchill's impact, let's not forget the broader canvas of history. His era was one of seismic shifts, with world wars reshaping borders, ideologies clashing like tectonic plates, and empires crumbling into the dustbin of history. Churchill was a giant in an age of giants, a figure whose shadow looms large over the 20th century. His leadership during WWII is rightly celebrated, yet it's essential to remember that he was part of a broader coalition. He didn't win the war single-handedly. He was part of a symphony of leaders, strategists, and ordinary people who collectively forged victory from the fires of conflict. So, why does Churchill remain such a compelling figure, a magnet for both admiration and criticism? Perhaps because his story is a microcosm of the human experience, a dance of light and shadow, triumphs tinged with tragedy. He reminds us that history is never black and white. It's a kaleidoscope of complexities, where heroes and villains often share the same stage. Churchill's life was an epic tale that encompassed the best and worst of his age, a testament to the enduring power of leadership in the face of adversity. And as we close the curtain on this chapter of Churchill's story, remember this: history is not a static record, but a living dialogue. Each generation reinterprets its heroes and villains, finding new lessons in old stories. Churchill's legacy, like that of many historical figures, will continue to evolve, shaped by the perspectives and priorities of those who come after us. As for Churchill himself, he once remarked, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." And write it he did, leaving us with a legacy as indelible as the man himself, a legacy that invites us to ponder, debate, and ultimately learn from the tapestry of history. You blink your eyes open to the bright Mediterranean sun streaming through the wooden shutters of your modest Pompeian home. The city is already buzzing, and you can almost smell the excitement. Or maybe that's the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from the streets. It's time to dive into the heartbeat of this vibrant city, the marketplace. Pompeii, nestled comfortably in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, is anything but a sleepy Roman backwater. With around 20,000 residents, it's a thriving hub of trade and commerce. You're stepping into the action, a bustling scene that could rival any modern-day stock exchange floor. The air is filled with the sounds of bartering and the distinct clinking of bronze coins, those little guys known as asses and sestertii. You're not just shopping. You're participating in the ancient world's economy, a complex web of supply chains and social hierarchies. Now hold onto your tunic, because if you're expecting a leisurely stroll through a quaint farmer's market, think again. The Pompeian marketplace is an exercise in organized chaos. Vendors shout over each other, eager to peddle their goods. From olives to garum, an intensely pungent fish sauce that the Romans can't seem to live without, everything has its price. Speaking of prices, let's break down the numbers. A loaf of bread might set you back about half an as, while a pint of wine could cost around 1 as. For perspective, think of an as a penny, and you'll get the idea. The market is a social microcosm, where class distinctions are as glaring as the midday sun. Forget any fantasies about equality. This is the Roman Empire, after all. The wealthier citizens, draped in togas that scream, "I have more money than you," saunter through the Macelum, a more upscale market area. Here, the elite scrutinize ivory jewelry and purple-dyed fabrics, the ancient world's equivalent of brand-name luxury goods. Meanwhile, you and most commoners navigate the more crowded stalls, haggling over everyday essentials like grains and vegetables. But let's not sugarcoat things. The market isn't just a place of opportunity, it's also a battleground where the social order is reinforced daily. Wealthy patrons might send their slaves to do the shopping, a not-so-subtle reminder of the rigid class structure. You're aware of your place in this Roman hierarchy, where the gap between rich and poor is as wide as the Gulf of Naples. And about those myths, Pompeii is often romanticized as this idyllic snapshot of ancient life. But let's debunk a few. This isn't the ancient equivalent of Whole Foods, folks. The market's charm doesn't erase the fact that it's also a haven for pickpockets and swindlers. Keep a hand on your purse, or you might find yourself a few asses short. The romantic notion of bustling trade often glosses over the gritty reality. The market is a place where survival instincts are honed as sharply as the knives on the butcher's block. As you weave through the throngs, you notice the diversity of goods on display. Amphorae filled with olive oil, imported from Hispania, sit next to baskets of figs and dates. The presence of exotic goods speaks volumes about Pompeii's connectivity within the vast Roman trade network. It's a small but significant cog in an empire that stretches from Britannia to Egypt. Yet, despite the global reach, much of the trade here is local, driven by the needs and resources of the immediate community. Your senses are almost overwhelmed by the cacophony of languages, Latin, Oscan, Greek, all mingling in the air. The city is a melting pot, a testament to the Roman Empire's expansionist prowess. But it's not just about commerce. The market is also a social hub, a place where news is exchanged faster than any imperial courier could travel. Gossip about political upheavals in Rome or the latest gladiatorial games at the amphitheater flows as freely as the wine. By now, you're probably wondering why any of this matters beyond a historical curiosity. Well, the marketplace is more than just a place to snag a good deal on salted fish. It's the economic engine that drives Pompeii, a city whose prosperity is intricately linked to its trade dynamics. Understanding this bustling center offers a window into the larger Roman world, with its intertwined economies, social structures, and cultural exchanges. So, as you pocket your change and head back into the streets, remember, you're not just shopping, you're part of a living, breathing economic tapestry. And while today's errands might seem mundane, they're actually a footnote in the grand narrative of history. Tomorrow, life will go on as usual in Pompeii, unaware that the clock is ticking down to a cataclysmic eruption. But for now, the marketplace thrives, and with it, the city. Hold on to that thought as you navigate the bustling streets, because in Pompeii, history is happening right under your sandaled feet. As you navigate the bustling streets of Pompeii, the vibrant hum of daily life surrounds you. But let's switch gears and take a peek under the toga of civic life. Politics in Pompeii is a curious beast, a blend of Roman governance and local flavor that might surprise you. Forget any rosy notions of democratic idyls. This is more oligarchy than democracy, where power is as sticky as the remnants of last night's garum sauce. At the heart of Pompeian political life are the duoviri, two local magistrates who hold the highest authority in the city. Picture them as the Roman world's answer to a dynamic duo, but with more togas and less superhero flair. These guys are responsible for everything from administering justice to organizing public games. If you think running a city of 20,000 souls sounds like a walk in the Forum, think again. They're the ones making sure the aqueducts flow and the streets aren't overrun by chariots gone rogue. But don't be fooled into thinking these positions are filled by the common folk. To even be considered for public office, you'd need a hefty bank account and a scroll of connections longer than the Appian Way. The elite of Pompeii, those toga-clad individuals you saw earlier in the Macelum, are the ones pulling the strings. It's a classic case of the rich getting richer and the powerful getting more powerful. Money talks, and in Pompeii it speaks Latin. Now, you might hear whispers of elections and popular votes, but let's be real. This isn't a model of participatory democracy. Vote buying is practically a sport, and candidates would distribute everything from bread to the occasional denarius to secure their seats. It's less about political platforms, and more about who can throw the best party. In fact, Some historians suggest that the real power in Pompeii might have rested with the collegia, or guilds, which were essentially social clubs with a side of political influence. Speaking of influence, Rome had more than a pinky finger in the Pompeian pie. As a Roman colony, Pompeii was subject to the whims of the Senate and the emperor. Imagine living in a world where your local leaders are constantly looking over their shoulders, wondering if a decree from Rome will append their plans faster than a rogue chariot in the Forum. The tension between local autonomy and imperial oversight adds a delicious layer of complexity to our understanding of Pompeii's political scene. But let's not just take my word for it. Pompeii's walls have stories to tell, and they're not all about heroic exploits or grand deeds. The city's graffiti. Yes, ancient Romans loved scribbling on walls just as much as modern teenagers, offers a candid take on public sentiment. From political endorsements to biting satire, these scrawled messages reveal a populace that's engaged, opinionated, and not afraid to speak its mind. One particularly cheeky piece of graffiti reads, "Vote for Lucius, the best baker in town," a tongue-in-cheek nod to the intertwining of politics and daily life. As you stroll past the Basilica, Pompeii's hub for legal proceedings and public business, it's clear that the law is as much a spectacle as it is a system. Court cases are public events, complete with spectators who cheer or jeer the proceedings. Justice is dispensed with a flair that would make any modern-day lawyer envious, a reminder that the drama of the courtroom has ancient origins. Moving through the Forum, the city's beating heart, you witness more than just commerce and governance. It's here that the social fabric of Pompeii is woven together, where citizens gather to discuss everything from the latest Roman edict to the outcome of last night's gladiator games. The Forum is a microcosm of the city's vibrancy, a place where politics, economy, and social life intersect in a chaotic dance. But don't get too caught up in the romantic notion of civic engagement. For many Pompeians, daily life is about survival, not senatorial debates. The gap between the elite and the average citizen is as glaring as the midday sun. While the wealthy enjoy the privileges of power, the rest of Pompeii navigates a world where their voices are faint echoes in the grand scheme of things. As the day in Pompeii unravels, you're left with a sense of a city that's both familiar and foreign. Its political landscape is a reflection of human nature, rife with ambition, intrigue, and the eternal quest for influence. Yet beneath the power struggles and civic duties, Pompeii remains a vibrant hub, where life unfolds with a richness that transcends its historical confines. With the sun beginning to dip behind the grandeur of Mount Vesuvius, leaving the streets bathed in a golden hue, you can't help but wonder about the stories that these ancient stones have witnessed. The political machinations, the bustling marketplace, the whispered secrets exchanged in the shadows, all form a tapestry that tells as much about human nature as it does about the city itself. As you leave the Forum behind, you carry with you a deeper understanding of Pompeii's political life. It's not just a tale of power and governance. It's a narrative of a community striving to find its place in the vast Roman Empire. And while the clock ticks towards an inevitable eruption, Pompeii continues to thrive, a testament to the enduring spirit of human endeavor. Stay tuned, because there's more to unravel in this ancient city as we journey deeper into its bustling existence. As you leave the Forum behind, you carry with you a deeper understanding of Pompeii's political life. It's not just a tale of power and governance. It's a narrative of a community striving to find its place in the vast Roman Empire. And while the clock ticks towards an inevitable eruption, Pompeii continues to thrive, a testament to the enduring spirit of human endeavor. But let's shift gears, or should I say, sandals, and take a leisurely stroll to the cultural heartbeat of Pompeii. It's lunchtime, and what's a day in ancient Rome without a peek into the vibrant world of entertainment and leisure? Now, if you're picturing glamorous spectacles and hedonistic feasts, shake that image loose. Sure, Romans knew how to throw a party, but the reality was a little less Gatsby and a bit more bare bones. First stop, the amphitheater, Pompeii's very own Colosseum, and it's buzzing with activity. This architectural marvel, built around 70 BCE, could seat around 20,000 spectators. Yep, that's the entire town squeezed in, elbow to elbow, ready for the day's entertainment. Gladiatorial games were the headliners, with gladiators themselves the rock stars of the ancient world. But let's not get carried away by visions of glory and valor just yet. Gladiators were mostly slaves, prisoners of war, or condemned criminals, not the freedom-loving warriors Hollywood would have you believe. Training was grueling, survival uncertain, and their lives often depended on the whims of the fickle crowd. A gladiator might earn his rudies, a wooden sword symbolizing freedom after years of bloodshed, but for most, the arena was a one-way ticket. And those glamorous games, well, they were funded by wealthy patrons looking to win public favor, a sort of ancient PR campaign with a side of carnage. Tickets to these events were often free, sponsored by politicians eager to curry favor with the masses. Imagine your local mayor handing out free concert tickets, but with more swords and sand. Despite the grim reality, the amphitheater was a social equalizer of sorts. Here, class lines blurred as rich and poor alike were united in their thirst for spectacle. But don't be fooled. VIP seating was a thing, and the best spots were reserved for the elite, because, of course, some things never change. Now, if gladiatorial combat isn't your cup of mulsum, Pompeii's bathhouses might be more your speed. These weren't just places to scrub up. They were the Starbucks of the ancient world, a social hub where news was shared, deals brokered, and maybe even a little gossip exchanged. The Stabian Baths, one of the oldest in Pompeii, offered a range of experiences from the frigidarium's icy plunge to the steamy embrace of the caldarium. Entry fees were modest, perhaps a quadrans or two. Think of it like the cost of that overpriced latte. Bathhouses were egalitarian in design, but stratified in practice. Different baths for different folks, as they say. The elite enjoyed more exclusive spaces, while commoners mingled in the more crowded areas. Yet, despite the class divisions, the baths were a great equalizer in another sense. Cleanliness and hygiene were, surprisingly, democratic. And speaking of democracy, here's a nugget of myth-busting for you. While Roman leisure pursuits are often romanticized as decadent, many average Pompeians worked hard and played harder. Life wasn't all about lounging in togas, eating grapes, and philosophizing. For the performers and workers behind the scenes, entertainment was less about leisure and more about labor. Take the actors in Pompeii's theaters, for example. These performers, often slaves or lower-class citizens, faced a precarious existence, their livelihoods as fleeting as the applause they garnered. The theater itself, a magnificent structure that could hold about 5,000 people, was a place of both high art and lowbrow humor. Comedies, tragedies, and mimes graced the stage, catering to a wide array of tastes. Admission was typically free, underwritten by wealthy benefactors who understood the power of a captivated audience. But let's drop the curtain on one final myth before the intermission. While we might imagine actors as celebrated figures, in Roman society they were often considered disreputable. The glamour, well, it existed mostly in the imagination of those who watched, not those who performed. As you wander past the bustling eateries and wine bars, think ancient fast food joints, where a quick lunch might consist of bread soaked in wine or a plate of lentils. It's clear that Pompeii is a city alive with activity. The Thermopolium, the Roman equivalent of a cafe, offers a glimpse into the culinary habits of the time. For a mere handful of asses, you could enjoy hot meals served from large jars embedded in the counters. While it wasn't exactly Michelin-starred dining, it was hearty and practical, fueling the populace for their daily tasks. As you digest both your lunch and the day's insights, it's evident that Pompeii's cultural and leisure life is a tapestry woven with complexity, contradiction, and a fair share of grit. While the city is often romanticized as a playground of the rich and idle, the reality is a mosaic of social dynamics, economic disparities, and human ambition. Stay with me as we delve deeper into the heart of Pompeii, where every street corner whispers tales of a bygone era and every stone bears witness to the triumphs and trials of its people. There's more to explore in this ancient city, where leisure and labor intertwine in a dance as intricate as any Roman mosaic. The sands of time may have buried Pompeii, but with each step we uncover the stories that make it eternally captivating. As you wander through the lively streets of Pompeii, with the echoes of theatre applause and the aromas from thermopolium stalls still lingering, let's turn our attention to the quieter, more intimate corners of the city. The homes where Pompeians lived, loved, and yes, sometimes bickered over who forgot to extinguish the oil lamp. Now, if you think Roman home, and your mind immediately conjures images of sprawling villas with marble columns and lavish frescoes, let's pump the brakes on that chariot for a second. The reality is a bit more nuanced. Sure, there were opulent domus, the kind of places that would make even a Roman god do a double take. These were the homes of the elite, complete with atriums, peristyles, and private baths. But don't let HBO fool you into thinking everyone was living like Caesar. Most of Pompeii's 20,000 residents were packed into insulae, essentially ancient apartment blocks. Let's start with the domus, the ancient equivalent of Beverly Hills' real estate. These homes were architectural marvels, designed around a central courtyard that acted as the lungs of the house, bringing in light and air. The atrium was where the family showed off their wealth, with impluvium pools catching rainwater and ornate mosaics underfoot. But beneath the glamour, there was a practical side. The peristyle gardens weren't just for admiring. They often grew herbs and vegetables, a nod to the agricultural roots of Roman society. The stark contrast comes when you step into an insula. These were multi-story buildings, often cramped and noisy. Think of them as the ancient world's answer to tenements. Rooms were small and basic, with shared facilities. Privacy was a luxury few could afford. If you're picturing a cozy little kitchen, think again. Most insulae were fire hazards waiting to happen, with clay stoves and wooden beams cheek by jowl. It's a wonder more of them didn't go up in flames before Vesuvius decided to put on its fiery show. The insulae were also a melting pot of social classes. You'd find everyone from artisans to small traders living cheek by jowl. The wealthy might own the entire building while renting out floors to those lower on the social ladder. It's a microcosm of Roman society, where economic disparity was as visible as the frescoes in a grand villa. Now, let's talk about the unsung heroes of the Roman household, the slaves. In a society where the idea of a weekend was as foreign as a Celtic invasion, slaves were the backbone of domestic life. They did everything from cooking and cleaning to running errands and educating children. One of our best archaeological glimpses into their lives comes from the remains of Pompeii itself. In the grand Villa of the Mysteries, evidence suggests a small army of slaves managed everything from wine production to personal grooming. Yet the life of a slave was as unpredictable as the whims of their masters. Their days were long, and their fates were tied to the prosperity of their owners. While some could earn their freedom, becoming freedmen and women, the reality for most was a life of service. But let's not gloss over the fact that slavery in Pompeii was a complex institution. More than mere servitude, it was an integral part of the economic and social fabric. And then there were the women of Pompeii. Forget the image of the docile Roman matron idling away her days in luxury. Women here, particularly of the lower classes, were often as industrious as their male counterparts. While upper-class women managed household affairs and wielded influence over family finances, many also ran businesses, participated in trade, or worked alongside men in shops and taverns. The archaeological record, including graffiti and inscriptions, reveals stories of women who defied the subservient stereotype, shaping their destinies within the confines of Roman society. But let's not be too quick to romanticize their independence. Legal and social constraints were as rigid as the marble statues that adorned the city's public spaces. Women were expected to adhere to the virtues of modesty and fidelity, and their primary role remained centered around the family and home. The patriarchal structure was unyielding, with the paterfamilias, head of the household, wielding near-absolute authority. As you meander through the remains of these ancient abodes, remember that Pompeii's domestic life is a tale of contrasts and contradictions. It's a city where the echoes of grandeur and the whispers of hardship coexist. In the shadow of Vesuvius, life was a delicate balance between luxury and survival, freedom and constraint. The homes of Pompeii, whether grand or humble, are silent witnesses to the rich tapestry of human experience, a tapestry that continues to unravel, thread by thread, under the scrutiny of historians and archaeologists. So, as you step out of the shadows of these ancient walls and back into the sunlit streets, carry with you the stories of those who lived and loved in Pompeii. Their lives, like yours, were shaped by the spaces they inhabited and the choices they made. And while the sands of time have buried much, the echoes of their existence continue to resonate, offering us a window into a world both foreign and familiar. Stay tuned, for our journey in this vibrant city is far from over. With the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and violet, Pompeii starts to wind down, or does it? As the city cools, the spiritual life of Pompeians truly begins to shimmer, like the glow of candles flickering in a shrine. Welcome to the evening rituals, where Roman religion and superstition are as intertwined as the vines in a Pompeian vineyard. First things first, let's talk household gods. Enter the Lares and Penates, the spiritual guardians of the home. Picture them as a divine insurance policy, except instead of premiums, you pay with offerings and prayers. These deities resided in the lararium, a small shrine usually nestled in the atrium. The typical lararium was a mini temple, complete with statuettes, incense burners, and sometimes even a splash of last night's wine. It's here that the family gathered to seek blessings for everything from a bountiful harvest to protection against, say, an unexpected volcanic eruption. But before you romanticize these domestic rituals as quaint family bonding, let's pull back the curtain. The Lares and Penates weren't just about spiritual comfort, they were a practical part of daily life. In a world where death lurked around every corner, disease, accidents, or the unpredictable wrath of Vesuvius, having a spiritual backup plan was as essential as carrying a spare tunic on a long journey. Beyond the household, public ceremonies offered a grander spectacle. The Forum, typically teeming with commerce by day, transformed into a stage for religious processions at dusk. These events were as much about public relations as piety. Imagine the pomp, priests in elaborately embroidered robes, the rhythmic beat of drums, and the sweet scent of sacrificial offerings wafting through the air. These ceremonies weren't mere acts of faith. They were community glue, reinforcing social order and the divine right of Rome to rule. But let's not kid ourselves into thinking this was all solemn worship. Roman religion was a grab bag of influences. Greek gods, Etruscan rites, and even a dash of Egyptian mysticism thrown in for good measure. The pragmatism of the Romans meant they often adopted deities like they were collecting trading cards. If a god promised good harvests or military victories, they were in. It was less about spiritual enlightenment and more about covering all bases in the game of life. Now, let's debunk the notion that Romans were purely rational thinkers. Despite their famed engineering prowess and legal acumen, superstition ran rampant. Omens were scrutinized with the intensity of a modern-day stock ticker. A flight of birds, a sudden thunderclap, or the unfortunate spill of salt could send Pompeians into fits of anxiety. And if you're wondering how they'd react to Vesuvius looming ominously, well, let's just say they might have consulted the augurs, priests who interpreted the will of the gods through the behavior of birds. Talk about winging it. The ancient texts and graffiti give us a window into the psyche of a people who, despite their achievements, lived in a world where the line between the divine and mundane was as thin as a Roman coin. These beliefs were deeply embedded in the cultural DNA, shaping decisions from personal to political. To the Romans, piety was a public affair, an essential part of maintaining Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods, which was believed to ensure the prosperity of the empire. But while rituals could be grandiose, they were also a form of societal control. Festivals like the Compitalia, honoring the Lares of Crossroads, were opportunities for elites to display their generosity, win public favor, and reinforce their status. The public rituals were less about divine connection and more about social cohesion, a reminder that in Rome, religion served the state as much as the soul. As night envelops Pompeii, the shadows cast by torchlight play tricks on the senses. The city, a bustling hub of trade and culture, quiets down. Yet the spiritual life of Pompeii continues to hum beneath the surface, a silent testament to the hopes, fears, and ambitions of its people. It's a reminder that while the Romans might have been masters of the material world, they were still deeply tethered to the mysteries of the divine. So, as you drift into sleep, consider this. Pompeii is more than a snapshot frozen in volcanic ash. It's a mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature. The city's spiritual practices, whether grand public ceremonies or intimate household rituals, reveal a society striving to find balance between earthly pursuits and celestial assurances. And while we may chuckle at the superstitions of the past, let's not forget that in our own ways we too seek comfort in the unseen, hoping to tip the scales of fate in our favor. Pompeii's legacy, buried yet enduring, is a testament to the resilience of human spirit and belief. The stories etched into its walls and whispered in its ruins remind us that, at our core, we are creatures of hope, ever reaching for the divine even as we tread the earth. So carry these tales with you as you drift into dreams, for they are as much a part of our past as they are a guide to our present. And who knows? Maybe, just maybe, the gods of old are still watching, amused by the dance of history and humanity. In the dusty annals of history, revolutions are rarely as straightforward as the movies would have us believe. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 CE, for example, wasn't a simple case of the downtrodden rising against oppressors. It was more like a Game of Thrones episode, complete with unexpected plot twists, dark alliances, and an abundance of black banners flapping ominously in the desert wind. The Abbasids were the scrappy underdogs in this saga, but don't let that fool you into thinking they were the heroes with shining armor and noble intentions. Overthrowing the Umayyads, who had been the top dogs of the Islamic world, was less about moral high ground and more about strategic maneuvering and a dash of opportunistic flair. Picture this. The Umayyads had been sitting pretty since 661 CE, running the caliphate from Damascus like it was their personal fiefdom. They enjoyed power the way one enjoys a good humus, plentifully and with a sense of entitlement. But here come the Abbasids, riding in with their banners dyed black, as if they'd raided Hot Topics' medieval section. These guys had a bone to pick, claiming descent from the Prophet Muhammad's uncle, Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib. That's kind of like saying you're related to George Washington through his uncle. It's a connection, sure, but not exactly a royal flush. The revolution itself was a whirlwind of chaos and cunning. It all kicked off in 747 CE with the revolt in Khorasan, a region in northeastern Iran, where the Abbasids found their ace in the sleeve. The Persian Mawali, or non-Arab Muslims, who were less than thrilled with the Umayyad preference for Arab elites. The Abbasids promised these Persians a taste of the good life, or at least a better life, and in return they got crucial support. Think of it as an early version of coalition building, minus the endless Zoom meetings. By 750 CE, the Abbasids were knocking on the doors of Damascus with an army that was as eclectic as a Spotify playlist. The actual overthrow wasn't a clean sweep, though. The final showdown happened at the Battle of the Zab, near the Great Zab River. It was here that the Abbasids, under the leadership of Abu al-Abbas, who would later be known as al-Safa or the Bloodshedder, a charming moniker if ever there was one, dealt the Umayyads their final blow. They didn't just win. They decimated the Umayyad forces, effectively ending their 89-year rule. Now, if you're thinking the Abbasids were greeted as liberators, think again. Their victory was more of a hostile takeover than a people's revolution. The Umayyad caliph, Marwan II, was chased down and killed in Egypt, and the rest of the Umayyad family was either executed or fled to the far corners of the earth. One of them, Abd al-Rahman I, managed to escape to Spain, where he founded the Emirate of Cordoba, a kind of Umayyad dynasty in exile. Talk about a twist ending. The Abbasids, having seized control, moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad in 762 CE, a city they built almost from scratch. This was no mere change of scenery, it was a statement. Baghdad was to be the heart of a new world, a city that would eventually rival Rome and Constantinople in its grandeur. It took 4 years and thousands of workers to construct, and when it was finally done, it was a circular city designed to be the center of the universe, or at least the center of the Abbasid universe. And here's where the brunch comes in. The Abbasids didn't just conquer and build, they partied. Baghdad became known for its intellectual and cultural life. The House of Wisdom was established, where scholars from across the world gathered to translate, study, and innovate. This was the golden age of Islam, where science, philosophy, and art flourished. But don't let the romanticism fool you. This was also about power consolidation. The Abbasids were securing their legacy, not just enjoying their newfound dominance. In the end, the Abbasid revolution was a masterclass in political intrigue and strategic realignment. It wasn't about good versus evil, but rather who could play the game better. They weren't knights in shining armor, and the Umayyads weren't cartoon villains. They were all just players in a high-stakes game of thrones. And if the Abbasids taught us anything, it's that sometimes, to win, you've got to rewrite the rules entirely, preferably with a dramatic flair and a keen sense of timing. So, with the keys to the kingdom firmly in hand, the Abbasids kicked off their reign with what can only be described as an audacious urban makeover. Relocating the capital from Damascus to Baghdad in 762 CE was like deciding to move the White House to a newly built Las Vegas, not for the faint of heart. But the Abbasids were anything but timid. They were visionaries with a taste for grandeur and a knack for reinvention. Baghdad wasn't just a city, it was a statement, a bold proclamation of Abbasid dominance and an architectural marvel that whispered or maybe shouted, "Look out, world! Here we come." Building Baghdad was no small feat. Picture this, a circular city designed with almost obsessive precision, stretching about 2 kilometers in diameter. This wasn't just for show, it was strategic. The round design meant every road led to the center, the Caliph's palace, ensuring that all roads literally pointed to power. It was a clever nod to the cosmological notion of a universe with a single, unifying core. Take that, Copernicus. But the city wasn't just about impressive geometry. It was about connectivity. Baghdad's location on the Tigris River made it a nexus of trade routes that linked the Mediterranean to the Indian subcontinent. It wasn't just the heart of the Abbasid Caliphate. It was the beating heart of global commerce. The city attracted merchants, scholars, and adventurers like bees to honey, or moths to an oil lamp if we're getting historical. By the 9th century, Baghdad was home to over 1 million people, making it one of the largest cities in the world. It was a multicultural melting pot before the term was even coined. Now, let's talk paper. No, not the kind you crumple up and toss in the trash. The kind that revolutionized information exchange. Enter the Abbasid introduction of paper, which they picked up from Chinese prisoners of war after the Battle of Talas in 751 CE. This was the Abbasid equivalent of stumbling upon the internet. Paper was cheaper and easier to produce than parchment, making books more accessible and encouraging the spread of knowledge. It turned libraries into intellectual powerhouses and paved the way for the creation of the House of Wisdom. You could say the Abbasids were the original knowledge is power enthusiasts, minus the motivational posters. And speaking of knowledge, the Abbasids were all about that life. The House of Wisdom in Baghdad became the epicenter of scholarship, where the greatest minds of the era gathered to translate and preserve the works of ancient Greece, Persia, and India. They weren't just hoarding knowledge, they were remixing it, adding their own flair and insights. Algebra, astronomy, medicine, fields that flourished under Abbasid patronage, driven by a thirst for understanding that was as relentless as a toddler's curiosity. The Abbasids didn't just want to know how the world worked, they wanted to improve it. But with great power comes great bureaucracy. The Abbasid administration was a sprawling beast that required a veritable army of scribes, tax collectors, and officials to keep it running. Imagine trying to manage an empire that stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indus River without email or even a reliable postal service. It was like organizing a global conference call with messenger pigeons and camel caravans. The bureaucratic apparatus was impressive, but it was also, at times, hilariously cumbersome. Taxes were collected, redistributed, and sometimes disappeared into the labyrinthine corridors of power. The caliphs had to be part monarch, part accountant, and part magician to keep everything from unraveling. Despite the occasional hiccup, the Abbasid economic strategies were nothing short of genius. They capitalized on Baghdad's position as a trade hub, fostering an environment where goods from across the known world converged. Spices from India, silk from China, gold from Africa. It was like a medieval Amazon. Only without the prime shipping. The Abbasids implemented a standardized currency system which facilitated trade and made Baghdad a financial powerhouse. With all this wealth flowing in, they invested in infrastructure, supporting agriculture and irrigation projects that kept the empire's backbone, its farmers, producing. Of course, not everything was sunshine and roses. The Abbasids' rise to power didn't mean universal love and harmony. There were plenty of internal challenges, from rival factions to disgruntled former allies. Managing an empire of such diversity was like herding cats, each with its own agenda and claws. But the Abbasids were adept at playing the political chessboard, balancing appeasement with authority. They employed a blend of diplomacy and strategic marriages, along with the occasional show of force, to maintain order and keep potential usurpers at bay. To the outside world, the Abbasids were the undeniable superpower. But within their borders, they had to constantly innovate and adapt to sustain their golden age. This was a period of extraordinary achievements and considerable contradictions. The Abbasids were builders and destroyers, scholars and warriors, visionaries and pragmatists. It was these dualities that fueled their legacy, making the Abbasid Caliphate not just a historical footnote, but a monumental chapter in the story of human civilization. As they say, all that glitters is not gold. The Abbasid Golden Age wasn't without its tarnishes, and as we delve deeper into their story, we'll uncover even more layers of complexity and intrigue. But for now, let's just appreciate the Abbasids' ability to transform their world with a mix of ingenuity, ambition, and a healthy dose of chutzpah. Now that we've marveled at Baghdad's architectural audacity and economic wizardry, it's time to dive into the real stars of this Abbasid blockbuster. The scholars, scientists, and poets who turned Baghdad into the intellectual equivalent of a 24-hour brainy rave. These were the folks who didn't just add chapters to the Book of Knowledge, they practically wrote a whole new volume. Let's kick things off with the House of Wisdom, Beit al-Hikmah, which sounds like a place where Gandalf might host a TED Talk. Established in the early 9th century by Caliph Harun al-Rashid and expanded by his son al-Mamun, it wasn't just a library. Oh no, it was a think tank, a translation factory, and a research hub all rolled into one. Imagine a mashup of the Library of Alexandria and Silicon Valley. This was where the intellectual elite gathered to sip on metaphorical espressos of genius and unleash their cerebral prowess on the world. But here's the kicker. The House of Wisdom wasn't just about preserving old texts. It was about remixing them in true Abbasid style. Scholars translated works from Greek, Persian, and Indian sources, adding their own flair, a bit like how a DJ drops a sick beat over a classic track. They didn't just copy Plato and Aristotle. They argued with them, debated their ideas, and sometimes downright disagreed. It was intellectual sparring at its finest, and the Abbasids were in the front row, cheering them on. Take Al-Khwarizmi, for example, the mathematician whose name sounds like a tongue-twister, but whose work was nothing short of revolutionary. This guy was the original tech innovator, penning the compendious book on calculation by completion and balancing, around 820 CE. That title might not sound like a bestseller, but it was the birth of algebra. Yes, the bane of high school students everywhere. But before you blame Al-Khwarizmi for your math class woes, consider this. His work laid the foundation for everything from engineering to computer science. So next time you're cursing algebra, remember, you're actually critiquing one of history's greatest minds. And then there's medicine, where the Abbasids really flexed their intellectual muscles. Meet Al-Razi, known to the West as Razes, an all-star physician who was basically the Dr. House of his day. He wrote the Kitab al-Hawi, or the Comprehensive Book, a medical encyclopedia that would have made any hypochondriac's head spin. Al-Razi didn't just parrot Greek medical texts. He tested theories, recorded his findings, and even questioned some of the greats like Galen. He was a man on a mission to understand the human body, and he wasn't afraid to call out errors when he saw them. You could say he was the original mythbuster, with a scalpel in one hand and a quill in the other. Of course, we can't forget the poets. In a world without Netflix, these wordsmiths were the prime-time entertainment. Abbasid poetry wasn't just about love and beauty. It was a cultural commentary, a mirror reflecting society's highs and lows. Poets like Abu Nuwas and Al-Mutanabi didn't shy away from critiquing the status quo. They were the rock stars of their era, wielding words with the precision of a surgeon and the passion of a revolutionary. Their verses were recited in courts and caravans alike, leaving an indelible mark on Arabic literature. Now, if you're thinking this golden age was all sunshine and knowledge, think again. The Abbasid scholars were navigating a complex tapestry of politics, religion, and social pressures. They had to balance intellectual freedom with the whims of their patrons, the caliphs. Al-Mamun, for instance, was a huge fan of the Mu'tazila school of thought, which emphasized reason and rationalism. But support the wrong idea, and you could find yourself on the wrong side of history, and possibly unemployed. The intellectual scene was as much about survival as it was about discovery. The Abbasids also weren't shy about borrowing from their neighbors, whether they wanted to or not. Take the paper industry, which they nabbed from the Chinese. After the Battle of Talas in 751 CE, captured Chinese papermakers were brought to Samarkand, and voila, the Abbasids launched their very own paper revolution. Suddenly, books were no longer the luxury items they once were. Knowledge could spread faster than a medieval gossip chain, and the Abbasids had the presses rolling before anyone could say intellectual property. As we delve deeper into this era, it's clear that the Abbasid Golden Age wasn't just about gathering knowledge, but making it accessible and functional. They weren't content to simply sit on a pile of scrolls and call it a day. They understood that to truly revolutionize society, knowledge had to be democratized. It had to be shared, debated, and yes, sometimes even challenged. Their legacy isn't just the sum of their discoveries. It's the spirit of inquiry and innovation they fostered. And so, the Abbasid Caliphate became a beacon of learning, a place where scholars from diverse backgrounds could come together and collaborate. It was an intellectual melting pot, with ideas exchanged as readily as goods in the bustling markets of Baghdad. This was the heart of the Golden Age, a relentless pursuit of understanding, an insatiable curiosity that drove humanity forward. Yet, as we all know, even the brightest stars eventually burn out. But for now, let's bask in the glow of their achievements and appreciate the boldness of a civilization that dared to ask, "What if?" before anyone else thought to raise their hand. In the next chapter of this saga, we'll explore how the Abbasids' intellectual pursuits continued to shape the world, even as their political fortunes began to wane. But for now, let's tip our hats to the scholars, scientists, and poets who made Baghdad the place to be, and who left us a legacy that continues to inspire and challenge us to this day. Just as we tip our hats to the intellectual superstars of the Abbasid era, we must also peek behind the curtain to see the cracks forming in this grand empire. A drama so intense, it makes Game of Thrones look like a daytime soap opera. You see, the Abbasid Caliphate wasn't all scrolls and enlightenment. It was an intricate web of power plays, rebellions, and the kind of family feuds that make Thanksgiving dinners seem serene. Let's start with the Zanj Rebellion, a turbulent chapter that unfolded between 869 and 883 CE. Imagine tens of thousands of enslaved Africans, the Zanj, laboring under oppressive conditions in the marshlands of southern Iraq. We're talking about people forced to do back-breaking work, turning swamps into arable land, a task about as fun as cleaning out a hoarder's garage. The economic backbone of these agricultural projects was the sugarcane industry, a sweet but sinister business that fueled Abbasid coffers. But as with many historical sugar rushes, the crash was inevitable. Enter Ali ibn Muhammad, a charismatic leader who rallied the Zanj and other disgruntled groups to revolt against their Abbasid overlords. His call for justice and freedom resonated like a rock anthem, and soon the rebellion swelled to monumental proportions. Over 15 years, the Zanj established their own state, even minting coins and issuing decrees. They captured key cities like Basra, causing panic in the Abbasid capital of Baghdad. It was as if the underdogs had suddenly seized the main stage, and the Abbasids were scrambling to regain control. The rebellion was eventually quashed with brutal force, but not without revealing the underlying instability of the Abbasid rule. And while the Abbasids were playing whack-a-mole with uprisings, provincial dynasties were busy carving out their own empires, like ambitious middle managers eyeing the corner office. The Tahirids in Khorasan, the Safarids in Sistan, and the Chilyunids in Egypt. Each was a power player in its own right, effectively ruling as independent states while paying lip service to the caliphate. It was like a medieval version of a franchise, where everyone wanted to be the boss, but no one wanted to share the profits. The Abbasids, keen to maintain the illusion of control, adopted a hands-off approach, granting these provinces autonomy as long as they paid taxes and professed nominal loyalty. But as any CEO will tell you, when you delegate too much authority, you risk losing the plot entirely. The caliphate's grip on its far-flung territories loosened, and before long, these provinces were making their own decisions, minting their own coins, and even raising their own armies. It was decentralization run amok, and the caliphs were left with little more than ceremonial power. While the Abbasids were juggling internal strife, external threats loomed like storm clouds on the horizon. The Byzantine Empire, never one to miss an opportunity, was always ready to pounce, while nomadic groups like the Turks began to stir. The Abbasids had to navigate these threats with the deftness of a tightrope walker, balancing diplomacy with military might. But as history would have it, balance is often elusive. The real kicker, though, was the rise of the Buyids, a dynasty that emerged from the mountains of Daylam in northern Iran. By the mid-10th century, the Buyids had marched into Baghdad like they owned the place, reducing the Abbasid caliphs to little more than figureheads. Imagine a puppet show where the puppet master suddenly decides to take center stage. The caliphs were kept around for their religious legitimacy, but the real power lay with the Buyids, who called the shots and collected the taxes. It was a coup in all but name, and the caliphs were left to play the role of ornamental figureheads. Through all this chaos, the Abbasids tried to project an image of stability, much like a swan gliding gracefully over water while paddling furiously beneath the surface. The caliphs may have worn crowns and held court, but the reality was far less glamorous. They were often at the mercy of mercenary armies, whose loyalty could be bought and sold like a commodity. These soldiers of fortune were a double-edged sword, essential for maintaining order, yet a constant threat to the caliphs themselves. In this high-stakes game, one wrong move could lead to a palace coup or worse. As the 10th century wore on, the Abbasid Caliphate resembled a once mighty tree, its branches sprawling but its roots weakening. The empire's vast territory was both a blessing and a curse, a testament to its former glory, but also a logistical nightmare. Communication across such distances was about as reliable as a carrier pigeon with a bad sense of direction. The caliph's edicts might take weeks, if not months, to reach distant provinces. by which time the situation on the ground could have changed dramatically. Economically, the Abbasids faced mounting challenges. Their control over trade routes weakened as new powers emerged, and the flow of wealth into Baghdad slowed to a trickle. Inflation reared its ugly head, and the empire's once bountiful coffers began to empty. It was like trying to run a luxury resort on a shoestring budget. Something had to give. Socially, the Abbasid society was a tapestry of diverse cultures and religions, a rich mosaic, but also a potential powder keg. Balancing the interests of Arabs, Persians, Turks, and others was a juggling act worthy of Cirque du Soleil. Sectarian tensions simmered beneath the surface, occasionally boiling over into violence. The caliphs had to be part diplomat, part therapist, as they tried to keep the peace in a realm where everyone had an opinion and wasn't shy about sharing it. And yet, despite these challenges, the Abbasid Caliphate remained a beacon of cultural and intellectual achievement. The House of Wisdom continued to flourish, and scholars, poets, and philosophers kept the flame of knowledge burning bright. It was a paradox, a civilization teetering on the edge, yet still capable of producing wonders. Like a phoenix, it seemed to burn brightly even as its foundations crumbled. In the end, the Abbasid story is one of resilience and reinvention, a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who refuse to be defined by their challenges. As we continue to explore this fascinating era, we'll uncover more about how the Abbasids navigated the tempestuous waters of history. The stage is set for the next act, and the drama is far from over. So stay tuned, because the Abbasid saga has plenty more twists and turns to reveal. But the Abbasid saga, like all good things, was destined to face its final curtain. As the 13th century rolled around, the caliphate that had once been the envy of the known world was now a shadow of its former self. The political landscape was as fragmented as a jigsaw puzzle, missing a few crucial pieces, and the caliphs were juggling more political drama than a reality TV reunion special. Enter the Mongols, stage left, with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball at a garden party. Now, if history has taught us anything, it's that when the Mongols come knocking, you don't just answer the door, you brace yourself. Led by Hulagu Khan, the grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongols had been expanding their empire with a zeal that made other conquerors look like they were on a leisurely stroll. By 1258 CE, they set their sights on Baghdad, a city that had once been the heart of the Islamic Golden Age, but was now more like a sitting duck in a shooting gallery. The siege of Baghdad was swift and brutal. Hulagu's forces, numbering over 150,000, surrounded the city with the precision of a well-oiled machine. The Abbasids, for all their intellectual prowess, were woefully underprepared for such a ferocious onslaught. Caliph al-Mustasim, the last in a long line of Abbasid rulers, was caught in the crosshairs of history's most formidable war machine. Despite pleas for peace and frantic negotiations, the Mongols were not in the mood for diplomacy. In February of 1258, they breached the city's defenses, and what followed was nothing short of apocalyptic. Baghdad, the jewel of the Islamic world, was sacked with a ferocity that left it in ruins. Libraries were torched, including the illustrious House of Wisdom. It said that the Tigris River ran black with the ink of countless manuscripts and red with the blood of the fallen. While the numbers are debated, some estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands perished. Al-Mustasim himself met a grim fate, reportedly rolled up in a carpet and trampled to death, a Mongol method of execution ensuring that no royal blood was spilled. Talk about a crushing defeat, literally. The fall of Baghdad wasn't just the end of the Abbasid Caliphate, it was the end of an era. The Mongols had snuffed out the flickering candle of Abbasid power, leaving a void that would reshape the Middle East for centuries. But while the political structure crumbled, the intellectual and cultural legacy of the Abbasids endured. Like an enduring melody, their contributions to science, mathematics, medicine, and the arts continue to resonate, influencing societies far beyond their borders. Take algebra, for example. The work of Al-Khwarizmi, the Abbasid mathematician whose name gives us the word algorithm, became a cornerstone of modern mathematics. His texts, translated into Latin in the 12th century, laid the groundwork for European mathematical development during the Renaissance. And let's not forget the medical advancements of the Abbasid era. The comprehensive works of Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, Avicenna, became standard texts in European and Middle Eastern medical schools for centuries. They weren't just doctors. They were the original medical influencers, whose prescriptions for knowledge went viral long before social media was a twinkle in humanity's eye. The Abbasids also left an indelible mark on literature and philosophy. The 1001 Nights, also known as the Arabian Nights, is a collection of Middle Eastern folk tales that continues to enchant readers today. While its origins are complex, the stories reflect the rich tapestry of Abbasid culture, blending influences from across the Islamic world. Philosophers like Al-Farabi and Al-Ghazali contributed to a vibrant intellectual climate, exploring ideas that would echo through the halls of medieval European universities and into the modern age. Despite their political decline, the Abbasids' commitment to scholarship and cultural exchange fostered a legacy that transcends time. It's a testament to the power of ideas, proving that while empires may fall, knowledge endures. The Abbasids understood that true power lies not in the might of armies or the wealth of coffers, but in the relentless pursuit of understanding, a pursuit that continues to inspire dreamers and thinkers today. As we reflect on the Abbasid Caliphate's storied past, it's clear that their influence is far from ancient history. The very fabric of our modern world is woven with threads of Abbasid innovation, from our mathematical foundations to our philosophical inquiries. So, the next time you find yourself grappling with algebra or marveling at a medical breakthrough, remember that you owe a nod of gratitude to those Abbasid pioneers who dared to ask, "What if?" long before it was cool. In the end, the Abbasid Caliphate is a reminder that history is neither static nor solitary. It's a dynamic continuum where the echoes of past achievements and failures shape the present and guide the future. The Abbasids may have lost their empire, but their legacy remains a vital part of our shared human story, a story as complex and captivating as the age they once illuminated. So, as the curtain falls on our Abbasid tale, let's not mourn the end of an empire, but celebrate the enduring spark of curiosity they ignited, a spark that continues to light our way in the ever-unfolding drama of history. In the vast, windswept steppes of 12th century Mongolia, a baby named Temujin was born under a sky that looked like it had been painted by the gods themselves. The year was 1162, and little did anyone suspect that this child would grow up to become Genghis Khan, the man who would eventually knit together the disparate Mongol tribes into a fearsome fighting force that would make even the most hardened warriors of the era tremble in their boots, or rather, in their felt-lined boots, because let's be honest, this was the 12th century, and they were all about practicality over fashion. Temujin's early life was anything but a Mongolian fairy tale. There were no grand palaces or silk robes in sight. In fact, his childhood was a masterclass in survival skills, the kind that would make Bear Grylls look like a pampered city slicker. Born to the Borjigin clan, Temujin was thrust into the harsh realities of nomadic life from the get-go. Forget about warm milk and lullabies. This kid was raised on horse milk and the lull of howling winds. His father, Yesujay, was a chieftain, but that title was more about leading a small band of warriors across the steppes than lounging on a throne. Life was a constant hustle for resources, with survival hanging by a thread thinner than a Mongolian horsehair string. When Temujin was just 9 years old, his father was poisoned by the Tartars, a rival tribe with a penchant for eliminating threats in the most final way possible. This left young Temujin in charge of a family that was promptly abandoned by their own people. Yep, you heard it right. His father's allies took one look at the new kid in charge and decided this was their cue to skedaddle. Left to fend for themselves, Temujin, his mother Holan, and his siblings had to scrape by on whatever they could scavenge. The Mongolian steppe was not exactly a land of plenty. The family survived on wild onions and the occasional marmot, which, let's face it, is not the stuff of culinary dreams. Despite these hardships, Temujin learned valuable lessons in leadership and resilience. By his teenage years, he had already developed a reputation for his resourcefulness. But it wasn't just about brute strength or bravado. It was his ability to forge alliances and navigate the treacherous political landscape that set him apart. This knack for diplomacy became apparent during one of his most formative experiences, his captivity by the Taichiad tribe. Captured at 15, Temujin found himself in a situation that would have broken lesser spirits. The Taichiad, who were no strangers to the fine art of holding grudges, had him shackled in a wooden yoke, a contraption that was about as comfortable as it sounds. But instead of resigning himself to a life of bondage, Temujin plotted his escape with the kind of cunning that would make a fox blush. The myth might paint him as a superhuman figure who bent the bars of his cage with his bare hands, but the truth is far more intriguing. It was his ability to read people and situations that led to his freedom. He managed to win the favor of a sympathetic guard, who, perhaps seeing something special in the young prisoner, loosened his bonds. Seizing the opportunity, Temujin made a daring escape during a festival when the camp was too busy celebrating to notice one scrappy teenager making a break for it. He hid in a river, submerged up to his nose to avoid detection, a move that was as much about guts as it was about sheer nerve. Eventually, he made his way back to his family, more determined than ever to unite the fractious Mongol tribes. Now, let's not get too carried away by the Hollywood version of this story. Temujin wasn't some lone wolf hero. He had a fair share of luck along the way. That escape could have gone sideways at any moment, but fortune smiled on him, a reminder that history sometimes hinges on the narrowest of margins. His escape from the Taichiad was a turning point, marking the beginning of his rise to power. It taught him a lesson that would guide his future conquests, that the greatest strength often lies in understanding and exploiting the weaknesses of others. So, as we look at the early life of Genghis Khan, it's a tale not of romanticized heroism, but of gritty survival, strategic alliances, and the occasional stroke of luck. Temujin's story is a testament to the idea that leadership is not about being the strongest or the loudest in the room. It's about being the smartest, the most adaptable, and sometimes just the most stubbornly determined to see things through. His journey from a struggling youth on the steppes to the unifier of the Mongol tribes is a story of resilience and shrewdness, and it's only just beginning. Stay tuned, because this is one historical saga that only gets more fascinating from here. And so, the saga of Temujin, the kid who turned Mongolian lemons into lemonade, or perhaps fermented mare's milk, continues. With his daring escape behind him, our young protagonist set his sights on something grander than mere survival, the unification of the Mongol tribes. Now, this wasn't just a hobby project like assembling IKEA furniture on a lazy Sunday. It was an epic feat that required a special kind of genius, one that could turn chaos into cohesion. Temujin's approach to unification was nothing short of revolutionary. He tossed out the old Mongolian playbook, which was basically a game of who's got the best pedigree, and replaced it with a merit-based system that made traditional aristocrats clutch their pearls, or whatever the Mongolian equivalent was. In this new order, your family tree mattered less than what you could bring to the table. Temujin, later known as Genghis Khan, understood that a leader's best bet was to surround himself with people who knew what the heck they were doing, irrespective of their lineage or the number of sheep they owned. So, how did he pull this off? Well, meet the Yasa Code, Genghis Khan's very own set of rules that laid the foundation for his empire. It combined aspects of law, military discipline, and even a dash of moral conduct. Think of it as a medieval Swiss army knife of governance. The Yasa wasn't just about cracking the whip. It was a unifying force that provided a common framework for a diverse and often fractious people. It was strict but effective, and it helped that violators of the Yasa often found themselves in a world of hurt. Fear and reward made for excellent motivators, after all. Speaking of governance, let's take a detour into one of Genghis Khan's less blood-soaked innovations. The YAM, the Mongolian postal system. Imagine a sprawling network of relay stations covering thousands of miles, like a Silk Road version of FedEx, minus the corporate logo and the overnight guarantees. Riders could cover up to 200 miles a day, swapping out horses at each station to keep the messages flowing. It was like the medieval equivalent of a 24/7 Twitter feed, but instead of snarky hashtags and viral memes, they were delivering military orders and diplomatic missives. You might say the Mongols invented their own brand of going postal, only this time it was a good thing. Now, as much as we admire Genghis Khan for his strategic brilliance, let's not kid ourselves into thinking he was all sunshine and roses. His leadership style was a terrifying blend of charisma and brutality. He built loyalty through a well-calibrated mix of fear and reward, like a medieval carrot stick approach. But here, the stick was more like a battering ram, and the carrot was a promise of riches and glory. Those who pledged loyalty were often rewarded handsomely, while dissenters received a one-way ticket to the afterlife. This wasn't just leadership, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare. One of the myths that often floats around Genghis Khan is the idea of him as an uncouth barbarian, a stereotype that's as enduring as it is inaccurate. Sure, the Mongol armies weren't exactly known for their table manners, but Genghis Khan's military campaigns were anything but senseless rampages. They were calculated and strategic, with an eye for exploiting the weaknesses of his enemies. The Mongol military machine was a well-oiled apparatus, flexible and fiercely disciplined, capable of swift, decisive strikes that left enemies scrambling. So, what made Genghis Khan's meritocracy tick? It was his knack for spotting talent and rewarding it, regardless of where it came from. His generals came from diverse backgrounds, including former enemies who recognized a winning team when they saw one. Genghis Khan was less concerned with where you came from and more interested in what you could do. It was this pragmatism that turned the Mongol tribes from a collection of warring factions into a unified juggernaut. If you're looking for more evidence of Genghis Khan's unconventional genius, consider his diplomatic strategies. He wasn't just about conquering, he was also about co-opting. When he encountered resistance, he often offered a choice. Join the Mongol Empire and enjoy the spoils, or resist and face annihilation. Talk about a win-win situation, if of course, you were wise enough to choose wisely. This approach allowed him to expand his influence without always resorting to outright warfare, a testament to his understanding that sometimes the pen, or in this case, the messenger, is mightier than the sword. As we peel back the layers of Genghis Khan's leadership, it's clear that he was more than just a conqueror. He was a visionary who reshaped the world around him. His blend of innovation, ruthlessness, and strategic acumen made him a leader for the ages, albeit one with a penchant for leaving a trail of devastation in his wake. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's plenty more to this saga, and as we continue to explore the rise of Genghis Khan, one thing is certain. History has rarely seen a figure quite like him, and the story is far from over. Stay tuned, because the adventure continues, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. As the dust settled on the Mongolian steppes, Genghis Khan had accomplished the unthinkable. He had united the fractured Mongol tribes into a singular force with a penchant for rewriting the rules of warfare. And now, with a well-disciplined army at his command, Genghis Khan set his sights far beyond the horizon, aiming to conquer lands from the Great Walls of China to the deserts of Central Asia. No longer satisfied with just the neighborhood turf, he was ready to play in the big leagues. So how did Genghis Khan pull off his military magic? Well, forget the clunky armor and slow-moving infantry of medieval Europe. The Mongol army was a different beast altogether, more akin to a medieval blitzkrieg with horse archers instead of tanks. Speed, mobility, and flexibility were the names of the game. His troops were like the wind, swift, unpredictable, and devastating. They could cover 80 miles a day, making them the original cavalry that could outrun even the swiftest rumors. Genghis Khan employed a range of military strategies, but psychological warfare was his piece de resistance. Before even setting foot on enemy territory, his reputation would gallop ahead, like a dark cloud promising a storm, leaving cities quivering in their sandals. His tactic: give cities the option to surrender peacefully and join the Mongol Empire. Accept, and you be treated with the same respect as a distant cousin at Thanksgiving. Resist, and well, let's just say the Mongol army had a talent for making examples out of the defiant. The message was clear: resistance was futile, and submission had its perks. Now, if you think Genghis Khan relied solely on brute force, you'd be as wrong as wearing socks with sandals. Espionage was another arrow in his quiver. He planted spies to gather intelligence, spread disinformation, and sow discord among his enemies. It's like he had his own medieval version of the CIA, but instead of wiretaps, his agents used whispers and rumors. In one particularly crafty move, his spies convinced the Zaizir dynasty that they'd be safer if they submitted before a single Mongol arrow had even flown their way. The Mongol Empire was expanding, not just through might, but by outsmarting the competition. But let's talk about the economic ripple effects of his conquests. Genghis Khan's campaigns didn't just leave a trail of destruction. They also paved avenues for commerce. By expanding the Mongol Empire, he inadvertently revitalized the Silk Road, turning it from a dusty trade route into a bustling superhighway of goods, ideas, and of course, the occasional plague. The Silk Road became the medieval version of Amazon Prime, minus the 2-day delivery guarantee. Suddenly, silk from China could grace the shoulders of Italian merchants, and spices from India could spice up a Persian stew. It was globalization before it was cool, all thanks to the Mongol Empire's reach. Now, let's debunk a common myth, the stereotype of the Mongols as noble savages. Sure, they were nomadic warriors with a knack for conquest, but to dismiss them as mere barbarians is to miss the forest for the trees. The Mongols were strategic thinkers with a keen eye for logistics. Their military campaigns required not just brawn, but brain power to coordinate supply lines across vast distances. Genghis Khan was less a barbarian and more a CEO of a war machine startup, with a knack for innovation and a business model that, while ruthless, was nonetheless effective. And while we're at it, let's address the legend that Genghis Khan was a bloodthirsty tyrant who reveled in chaos. The truth is, he was a leader who understood that to maintain control over a sprawling empire, law and order were essential. The Yasa Code wasn't just a list of do's and don'ts. It was the glue that held his empire together. It ensured that trade could flourish, that disputes were settled swiftly, and that there was a semblance of justice, even if it was enforced with an iron fist. As Genghis Khan's conquests pushed onward, the Mongol Empire became a mosaic of cultures, religions, and languages. Rather than imposing a single culture, Genghis Khan allowed for a surprising level of religious freedom and cultural exchange. His empire was a melting pot that rivaled any modern metropolis, where ideas flowed as freely as the goods on the Silk Road. In this way, the Mongol Empire was less about erasing identities and more about blending them into a new, albeit occasionally brutal, tapestry. So, as we navigate the legacy of Genghis Khan, it's a tale of contrasts. He was both a conqueror and a unifier, a destroyer and a creator. His story is one of ambition, strategy, and the relentless drive to shape the world in his image. And while his methods were often ruthless, the changes he ushered in were profound and far-reaching, affecting everything from military tactics to global trade. As this historical saga unfolds, the legacy of Genghis Khan continues to reveal layers of complexity. His military conquests were but one chapter in a story that changed the course of history, leaving a mark that will be felt for centuries. Stay tuned, because this journey through time is far from over, and trust me, the best, or perhaps the most jaw-dropping, is yet to come. Now, as we dive deeper into the Mongol Empire's inner workings, let's get one thing straight. Genghis Khan wasn't just a warlord with a knack for strategic carnage. Oh no, this guy was a grandmaster of administration, a sort of medieval Steve Jobs with a penchant for governance over gadgets. When you've got an empire stretching across 12 million square miles, and no, that's not a typo, you can't just wing it with a few strong-armed tactics. You need the organizational skills of a wedding planner on caffeine. Here's where Genghis Khan's administrative genius really shone. First off, let's talk about the Yasa Code again. This wasn't just a book of rules. It was more like the Swiss Army knife of legal systems. The Yasa created a unified legal framework across the empire, ensuring that no matter where you were, from the Siberian forests to the Iranian plateaus, there was a common understanding of justice. This wasn't some slapdash decree scribbled on the back of a yak hide. It was systematically spread across the empire, like a medieval version of the Magna Carta, only with fewer frills and more consequences. Now, on to the myth-busting. The Western perception of the Mongols as uncouth raiders is, quite frankly, a historical injustice. Sure, they weren't exactly the poster children for diplomacy, but Genghis Khan knew that to govern effectively, he had to foster a sense of identity and unity among the diverse peoples under his rule. He achieved this through a policy of religious tolerance that would make even the most progressive modern states look like amateurs. Whether you worshipped the sky, the earth, or a pantheon of deities, you were welcome in Genghis Khan's empire, as long as you paid your taxes and didn't start a rebellion. And let's not forget the Mongol Empire's own version of a student exchange program. With so many cultures colliding, you had a melting pot that was less about assimilation and more about a cultural buffet. The Mongol Empire became a place where a Chinese engineer could find himself explaining the intricacies of gunpowder to a Persian scientist over a bowl of fermented mare's milk. It was a hotbed of unexpected collaborations, like a medieval TED Talk without the mandatory standing ovation. But how did all this cultural exchange happen? Well, it wasn't just by chance. Genghis Khan's empire was stitched together by the YAM system, that medieval postal network we mentioned earlier. It was the connective tissue that allowed information, and the occasional juicy piece of gossip, to flow freely. The YAM was the lifeblood of the empire, ensuring that news, policies, and innovations didn't just stay localized, but spread like wildfire, creating a sense of cohesion and shared purpose. Now you might be thinking, sure, this sounds great, but what about the economy? Well, buckle up, because the Mongol economy was as groundbreaking as their military tactics. Genghis Khan understood that trade was the grease that kept the empire's wheels turning. By revitalizing the Silk Road, he created an economic artery that pumped wealth across the continent. Goods traveled faster than a Mongol horse, and the resulting trade boom turned cities like Samarkand and Bokhara into bustling metropolises that would make New York City seem like a sleepy village. So why does this matter? Well, for one, it debunks the myth of the Mongols as purely destructive forces. While it's true they left their fair share of smouldering ruins, they also laid the foundations for a thriving economy that connected east and west like never before. They were the ultimate middlemen, ensuring that silk, spices, and even stories flowed across their vast network, turning the Mongol Empire into a medieval version of the World Trade Organization, minus the bureaucracy. And here's a little nugget of wisdom from our friend Genghis. The greatest power often lies in understanding the strengths of others. By embracing the talents and knowledge of the people he conquered, Genghis Khan didn't just build an empire. He built a legacy of cultural and intellectual exchange that transcended borders. This wasn't just about enlarging his empire. It was about enriching it with the diversity of human experience. So, as we wrap up this deep dive into Genghis Khan's administrative brilliance, let's remember that history isn't just about the battles won or the territories claimed. It's about the systems and ideas that continue to influence us today. Genghis Khan's empire was a blend of might and mind, a testament to the power of innovation and adaptability in the face of chaos. And while his methods might have been as harsh as the Mongolian winter, the cultural and economic legacy he left behind is a reminder that even the most tumultuous times can give birth to progress. Stay tuned, history buffs, because there's still more to unravel in this epic saga. The Mongol Empire's story is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as riveting as the last. And so, as the sands of the Mongolian steppes continue to shift, we find ourselves pondering the legacy of Genghis Khan, a figure as complex as a jigsaw puzzle with extra pieces. You see, Genghis Khan wasn't just a conqueror. He was a cultural hurricane, reshaping the landscapes of Eurasia, much like a medieval urban planner with a taste for chaos. But what did he really leave behind? Was he a brutal despot or a misunderstood visionary? Spoiler alert, it's complicated. First, let's tackle the elephant, or rather, the Mongol horse in the room, Genghis Khan's death and that ever-enigmatic burial. The man who had reshaped continents met his end in 1227, but not from a grand battle or a dramatic betrayal. Nope, the history books suggest he might have fallen from a horse or succumbed to injuries, proving once again that even the most formidable leaders are still at the mercy of life's banalities. His burial, wrapped in mystery, has become the stuff of legend. According to the tales, his tomb was concealed so well that even Indiana Jones would have thrown in the towel. Some say a river was diverted over his grave. Others claim all witnesses were, let's say, permanently silenced. Either way, it's a mystery that continues to baffle historians and treasure hunters alike, a high-stakes game of hide and seek with a historical twist. Now, onto the bigger picture. Genghis Khan's reign wasn't just about amassing territories like a medieval monopoly player on a winning streak. The Mongol Empire, at its zenith, stretched from the Sea of Japan to the fringes of Europe, covering about 9 million square miles. That's a lot of real estate, folks. But what made this empire tick wasn't just the vastness, but the innovations it spread across its domains. The Mongols were like the Wi-Fi of the medieval world, connecting disparate cultures in ways previously unimaginable. Paper currency, religious tolerance, and advanced postal systems spread like wildfire, leaving a lasting imprint on world history. Speaking of lasting impacts, let's chat about the Silk Road. Under Genghis Khan's rule, this ancient trade route became the superhighway of commerce and culture, a medieval version of the internet, minus the cat videos. The flow of goods, ideas, and yes, even diseases like the Black Death, transformed the economic landscape of Eurasia. While the plague might not have been the Mongols' proudest export, the revitalization of trade networks laid the groundwork for a more interconnected world, an early precursor to globalization. And what about the cultural impacts? Genghis Khan's empire was a veritable melting pot, a place where a Persian poet could rub shoulders with a Chinese artist, all under the watchful eye of Mongol governance. This cultural exchange was a two-way street. The Mongols adopted the best practices of the cultures they conquered, from Persian administrative techniques to Chinese siege warfare tactics. In return, they introduced innovations like gunpowder and printing technology to the West, leaving a legacy that would ignite the Renaissance centuries later. But let's not gloss over the darker side of this legacy. Genghis Khan's methods were often as harsh as a Siberian winter. His military campaigns were marked by brutality and mass destruction, leaving cities in ruins and populations decimated. The numbers are staggering, with estimates suggesting tens of millions perished during his conquests. It's a stark reminder that history's most transformative figures often leave a trail of devastation in their wake. So, was Genghis Khan a brutal conqueror or a misunderstood unifier? The truth is, he was both. He was a man of contradictions, embodying the duality of human nature. His reign was a masterclass in governance and innovation, yet also a testament to the destructive power of ambition. Perhaps his greatest legacy is the reminder that history is not black and white, but a tapestry of complexities, where the lines between heroism and tyranny blur. As we wrap up this epic tale, let's not forget the lessons Genghis Khan's story offers. He was a leader who understood the power of flexibility, adaptability, and the occasional use of overwhelming force. But more than that, he was a visionary who saw the potential for a unified world, even as he wielded chaos to achieve it. His story is a reminder that the greatest legacies are not just built on victories, but on the innovations and ideas that continue to shape our world long after the dust has settled. So, as you drift off into a slumber filled with dreams of Mongolian steppes and secret tombs, remember this. History is a grand tapestry, woven with the threads of human ambition, ingenuity, and folly. And in this tapestry, Genghis Khan's legacy stands out as a vivid reminder of the power and peril of reshaping the world in one's image. Sleep tight, history buffs, for the past is never as distant as it seems. Attila the Hun. Just the name alone inspires images of a wild barbarian mowing down Roman legions like a lawnmower at a summer barbecue. But before we uncork that keg of chaos, let's rewind to the origins of the man who would become the terror of 5th century Europe. It's like the prequel to a blockbuster movie, and trust me, the backstory doesn't disappoint. In the early 400s, the Roman Empire was like that aging superstar who still thinks they can sell out stadiums. Sure, they've got the name recognition, but the shine was starting to dull. Enter the Huns, a nomadic tribe from the steppes of Central Asia who were as misunderstood as they were feared. These guys were the rock stars of the horseback realm, known for their unrivaled skills in mounted warfare. Forget the old westerns. These were the original cowboys, minus the boots and 10-gallon hats, plus a ponchon for skull-crushing. The Huns lived by a code that was equal parts survival and conquest. Their society was less about who wore the fanciest toga, and more about who could shoot an arrow through a rabbit's eye at 300 yards while galloping at full speed. Their take on diplomacy was refreshingly straightforward. Less red tape, more blood and treasure. If there was a problem, you didn't call a meeting, you called the cavalry. Attila was born into this world around 406 AD, give or take a year. Details are fuzzy because, well, ancient record-keeping wasn't exactly Instagram-ready. As a young Hun, Attila was taught the sacred arts of raiding and pillaging. Picture his childhood as a mix between a survival boot camp and a never-ending game of capture the flag. Only the flags were entire villages. He learned early on that the world was his oyster, provided it was first roasted over an open fire and devoured with unbridled enthusiasm. The Huns, under Attila's forebears, had already established themselves as a force to be reckoned with. They had a knack for turning up uninvited at the front doors of various tribes and demanding a cut of the action. By the time Attila was ready to step into the limelight, the Huns had carved out a niche for themselves as the muscle for hire in the European backyard brawl. Now, the Roman Empire was a bit of a basket case at this point. Imagine a giant, sprawling bureaucracy that was trying to keep track of 24 fires while balancing a budget that made 0 sense. The Western Roman Empire was crumbling like a stale cookie, and the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as Byzantium, was juggling its own set of headaches. Into this mess, Attila emerged as a leader, and not just any leader, but a guy who could unite the Huns under one banner and give the Romans a coronary in the process. Attila officially took the reins of power around 434 AD alongside his brother Bleda. Yes, it was a family affair, but not for long. The partnership was like a sitcom that was cancelled after the first season. Bleda mysteriously died, leaving Attila as the sole ruler. Some say it was fraternal tension gone awry. Others suspect Attila gave Bleda an involuntary retirement package. Either way, Attila was now the big cheese. Under Attila's command, the Huns transformed from a wandering tribe into a well-oiled war machine. They perfected the art of the horse-archer blitzkrieg, a tactic that made Roman legions look about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. Hunnic warriors could shoot arrows with pinpoint accuracy while riding at full tilt, a skill that turned battlefields into shooting galleries where the Romans were the sitting ducks. Attila was no slouch when it came to the finer points of warfare either. He understood that psychological warfare was half the battle. His very presence could send shivers down the spines of Roman generals. The Romans even paid him tribute to keep him from turning their cities into smouldering ruins. A kind of ancient protection racket, where the only insurance policy was Attila's good mood. But who were the Huns when they weren't busy terrorizing Europe? They were an enigmatic lot, to say the least. Hunnic society was a curious blend of tradition and opportunism. They worshipped a pantheon of gods that reflected their harsh, nomadic existence. Rituals were tied to the cycles of nature, and their spirituality was as raw and untamed as the steppes they called home. In terms of governance, the Huns were egalitarian, at least when it came to who could rise to power. Merit was king, and anyone with the ambition and skill could climb the ranks. Though, let's be honest, Attila was the exception who redefined the rule. He was a leader who combined charisma with cruelty, a man who could inspire loyalty through a combination of fear and fervor. As for their economic model, the Huns preferred a hands-on approach. Why bother with trade negotiations when you could help yourself to whatever you wanted by force? Their economy was a zero-sum game, and they were the undisputed champions. They leveraged the spoils of war to fund their campaigns, turning plunder into a fine art. By the time Attila's resume was filled with enough conquests to make even Alexander the Great nod in approval, Europe was a chessboard, and Attila was the grandmaster. He had an instinctual understanding of the balance of power, and he was more than willing to tip the scales in his favor. As we set the stage for Attila's reign, it's crucial to remember that he wasn't just a barbarian at the gates. He was a shrewd strategist, a visionary in his own brutal way. The Romans, for all their architectural marvels and philosophical musings, had a blind spot for this kind of raw, uncensored power. Diplomacy with Attila was a high-stakes poker game, and the Romans were holding a straight flush, while Attila bluffed his way to victory with nothing more than a pair of twos and a menacing grin. So, as we prepare to delve deeper into the life and times of Attila the Hun, remember, history often paints with broad strokes, but it's the fine details that reveal the true picture. Stay tuned, because we've only just scratched the surface of the legend and legacy of Attila, the scourge of the Romans. So, picking up where we left off, let's wade into the fascinating quagmire of Attila's military escapades against the Eastern Roman Empire. If you thought Attila was just a demolition expert with a penchant for turning cities into smoldering ruins, think again. This guy could negotiate like a Wall Street shark, except he preferred gold to stock options and had a penchant for making emperors break into a cold sweat. Attila's dealings with the Roman emperors were the stuff of legend, and not always in the way you'd expect. Picture this. The year is 441 AD, and Attila's got his eyes on the Eastern Roman Empire like a kid in a candy shop. The empire was a bit like a piñata stuffed with gold, and Attila had the biggest stick. His tactics? Well, let's just say he didn't need to read Sun Tzu's Art of War to know that intimidation was a mighty tool. The Romans, no strangers to the good old game of tribute, were coughing up gold to keep Attila at bay. But we're not talking pocket change here. The Romans agreed to pay Attila a tribute of 700 pounds of gold annually. Let that sink in for a moment. That's roughly 230,000 denarii, a staggering amount even by Roman standards. To put it in context, the gold could have funded a legion or two, or, bought enough wine and olives to keep a small city partying for months. But Attila wasn't just about the cash grab. He was a master of the psychological play. He knew that every pound of gold conceded was a confession of Roman weakness. Each tribute payment was a reminder that the Roman Empire wasn't the invincible juggernaut it once was. Attila was not just collecting tribute. He was systematically dismantling the aura of Roman invincibility. His campaigns against the Eastern Roman Empire were a mix of brute force and shrewd diplomacy. The 441–442 AD campaigns saw Attila and his Hunnic horde tearing through the Balkans like a hot knife through butter. Cities crumbled, and Roman armies scattered before them. But as with any great story, there's always a twist. Attila's supposed invincibility wasn't as ironclad as his PR team would have you believe. Let's debunk the myth. Attila's campaigns weren't a seamless series of victories. There were missteps, strategic blunders, and the occasional facepalm moment. For instance, during his 447 AD campaign, Attila and his forces were repelled at Thermopylae, a name that might ring a bell for its association with more famous battles. The Huns, despite their fearsome reputation, were outmaneuvered by the terrain and forced to retreat. It was a reminder that even the most formidable armies could be undone by geography and a bit of tactical savvy. And then there's the matter of the Battle of the Utis River. In 447 AD, Attila clashed with the Eastern Roman forces led by the military commander Arnegisclus. The battle was brutal, a slugfest of epic proportions. Though Attila eventually claimed victory, it came at a hefty price. The Huns suffered significant casualties, a reminder that their leader wasn't infallible. These defeats and setbacks chipped away at the myth of Attila's invulnerability, showing that even the scourge of God could bleed. But let's not kid ourselves. Attila was a menace. His campaigns drained the Roman treasury faster than a gambling addict in Vegas. The Eastern Roman Empire was spending more on defense and reparations than on infrastructure or public projects. The economy was bleeding, and the Huns were the leeches. This financial hemorrhage highlighted the underlying weaknesses of the Roman state, an empire that was, quite literally, paying to survive. Yet, despite the strategic hiccups, Attila's legacy endured. His uncanny ability to extract tribute and his relentless pressure on Roman borders forced the Eastern Roman Empire into a defensive crouch. It was a game of chess, and Attila had the Romans in check, if not yet checkmate. Now, let's talk about the man behind the myth. Attila's dealings with Roman emperors were as much about psychology as they were about warfare. He knew the power of reputation and wielded it like a weapon. Attila understood that fear was a currency, one that could be traded more effectively than gold. The Romans recognized in him a force that couldn't be bargained with in the traditional sense. They were dealing with a man who saw diplomacy as a prelude to conquest, a leader who knew that a good scare could be worth 1,000 swords. And there's the rub. Attila's mythos was as much a creation of Roman fear as it was of his own making. The more the Romans talked about the Hunnic threat, the more it grew in the public imagination. The legend of Attila was a self-perpetuating cycle, a narrative that fed on its own infamy. The real Attila was a complex figure, part ruthless conqueror, part shrewd negotiator, and entirely human with his own set of flaws and foibles. As we peel back the layers of Attila's campaigns, it's essential to recognize that history isn't just a series of victories and defeats. It's a tapestry woven from the threads of ambition, fear, and the relentless march of time. Attila's story is one of power and politics, a saga of an empire trying desperately to hold itself together while a relentless force chipped away at its foundation. So, as we continue to unravel the tale of Attila the Hun, remember that history is often less about the grand narratives and more about the intricate details. The numbers, the decisions, the human element, these are the pieces that form the mosaic of the past. And in the case of Attila, the details reveal a man who was both a product of his time and a shaper of history. Stay tuned, because we're far from done exploring the whirlwind that was Attila's reign. There are more campaigns to dissect, more myths to challenge, and more insights to uncover. Attila's reign was as relentless as a Hunnic cavalry charge, and his ambitions knew no borders. As the dust settled in the east, his gaze turned westward, to Gaul, a land ripe for plunder and ripe, with opportunity to send the Romans scrambling. It was 451 AD, and Attila was about to orchestrate one of history's most infamous road trips, with all the chaos of a rock band on tour, minus the groupies and hotel room trashing. This was the campaign that would lead to the legendary Battle of the Catalonian Plains, a showdown that would make even the most epic blockbuster climax look like a picnic. The setup was classic Attila. Gather a coalition of barbarian tribes, march into enemy territory, and unleash havoc. But here, that's where our story veers into the realm of a medieval Avengers assemble. The Western Roman Empire, which was less an empire and more a collection of bickering bureaucrats at this point, found itself in a desperate scramble to defend Gaul. Enter Aetius, the Roman general who was both a seasoned tactician and, let's be honest, a man who probably had a permanent headache from dealing with the empire's political mess. Aetius wasn't alone in this. He understood the stakes and knew that beating Attila was less about Roman might and more about strategic alliances. So he did what any savvy strategist would do. He called in favors and struck deals faster than a politician during election season. The Visigoths, Burgundians, and Franks were brought together, a motley crew that would have made for a killer reality TV show. Their common enemy, Attila and his Hunnic horde. Now, let's pause and appreciate the absurdity here. The Romans, who had spent centuries labeling these groups as barbarians, were now holding hands with them in a kumbaya moment of survival. It's like those buddy cop movies where the uptight detective teams up with the wild card. You just hope they manage to solve the case before they drive each other insane. Fast forward to June 451 AD, and the stage was set for the Battle of the Catalonian Plains, also known as the Battle of Chalons. This wasn't just any battlefield. It was a proving ground for the power dynamics of the entire Western world. Attila's forces were estimated to be around 200,000 strong, a terrifying melange of Huns, Ostrogoths, and other tribes who had hitched their wagons to Attila's seemingly unstoppable star. Facing them was Aetius's coalition, which boasted roughly 150,000 troops. The Roman-Visigothic alliance wasn't just a coalition of convenience. It was a necessity born out of the realization that Attila's ambitions were as boundless as his appetite for destruction. The stakes were monumental, and both sides knew it. Whoever won here would control the future of Western Europe, at least for a while. The clash was nothing short of apocalyptic. The Catalonian plains turned into a gruesome tapestry of carnage and chaos, with every inch of ground contested like it was the last pizza slice at a frat party. Attila, true to form, led from the front, his presence as much a psychological weapon as his armies were a physical one. The battle raged for hours, a swirling mass of human ferocity and desperation. What made this battle legendary wasn't just the scale of bloodshed, but the sheer unpredictability of it all. Imagine a chess game where the pieces are armed to the teeth and the board is on fire. It was during this melee that Attila's forces met their match. The Visigoths, led by King Theodoric I, fought with a ferocity that matched the Huns blow for blow. In a dramatic twist, Theodoric was killed during the battle, a moment that could have shattered the coalition, but instead galvanized it. The battle's climax was a nail-biter. Attila, ever the tactician, had a backup plan, a massive funeral pyre where he planned to immolate himself if defeat seemed inevitable. Talk about commitment to a dramatic exit. But fate had other plans. The alliance's relentless pressure forced the Huns to retreat, leaving Attila to fight another day. It was a tactical victory for the Romans and their allies, a temporary reprieve from the scourge that was Attila. Here's where we debunk a myth or two. While the Roman-Visigothic alliance halted Attila's advance, they didn't destroy him. Attila walked away from the Catalonian plains bruised, but far from beaten. The Huns regrouped, their mythos intact, while the Western Roman Empire basked in a victory that was as much about survival as it was about strategy. The aftermath of the battle offers a peek into the precarious nature of ancient alliances. Despite their success, the coalition was as fragile as a soap bubble. The Visigoths and Romans, united in crisis, quickly returned to their old suspicions and rivalries. Aetius, the mastermind behind the alliance, would eventually fall victim to the same political backstabbing that plagued the Roman court, meeting his end at the hands of Emperor Valentinian III. A reminder that gratitude in politics is about as reliable as a wooden nickel. Attila, meanwhile, wasn't quite done with the Romans. This defeat was a setback, sure, but not a career-ending one. Like any proper villain worth his salt, he would return, reshuffling his deck and plotting his next move. The Huns remained a formidable force, and Attila's name continued to evoke both dread and begrudging admiration. This is the part where we acknowledge the unsung heroes of history, the ones whose contributions get overshadowed by the larger-than-life figures like Attila. The Roman and barbarian forces that faced the Huns might not have their names etched in every history book, but their role was crucial. They were the ones who stood against the tide, who proved that even the most fearsome foes could be challenged. So, as we take a breather from the whirlwind of Attila's campaigns, remember that history is a tapestry of human endeavor, woven from the threads of countless stories, both grand and humble. Attila's foray into Western Europe was a chapter filled with drama, alliances, and the ever-present spectre of betrayal. A story that continues to unfold, with more twists and turns waiting in the wings. And with that, we prepare for the next stage of Attila's saga. The adventure is far from over, and the stakes are about to get even higher. So stay tuned, because the legend of Attila the Hun has more pages left to turn. As Attila's story unfolds, it becomes clear that this scourge of the Romans was not just a one-trick pony. Sure, he could lead a cavalry charge that would make a Spartan blush, but Attila also had a flair for the dramatic, and nothing screams drama quite like a scandalous marriage proposal. Enter Honoria, the Roman noblewoman whose plea for help to Attila was like tossing a match into a powder keg. Honoria, sister of the Western Roman Emperor Valentinian III, was as rebellious as they come. Imagine being so fed up with your gilded cage that you write a letter to the most feared man in Europe, asking for assistance. That's not just a cry for help, it's a declaration of war, or at least, that's how Attila took it. In 450 AD, after receiving Honoria's letter and a ring as a token, Attila decided it was a marriage proposal. And why not? Who wouldn't want to add Empress of Rome to their resume? Picture this. Attila, with a twinkle in his eye, demands half of the Western Roman Empire as Honoria's dowry. Talk about a high-stakes romance. Naturally, this didn't sit well with Valentinian III, whose idea of family therapy didn't include handing over the empire to a barbarian leader. Attila's proposal was less about love and more about leverage, a classic power play wrapped in the guise of a romantic entanglement. But let's not get too caught up in the soap opera. Behind the curtain of Attila's personal life lay the bustling machinery of a nomadic empire. Running such an operation was no small feat. Imagine trying to manage a group of people who lived on horseback, preferred looting to peace talks, and saw land not as territory to govern, but as a buffet to be raided. Attila was less a king and more a CEO of a wildly successful, albeit morally questionable, enterprise. The logistics of leading the Huns were as mind-boggling as a trigonometry pop quiz on a Monday morning. Picture coordinating thousands of warriors spread across the vast steppes of Central Asia and Eastern Europe. This wasn't just a matter of saying, "Go get 'em, boys," and hoping for the best. Attila needed to ensure his warriors were well-fed, well-armed, and kept motivated by the promise of treasure and glory. It was a balancing act worthy of Cirque du Soleil, minus the safety nets. And then there was the economy. The Hunnic financial model was akin to a medieval venture capital firm. Invest in a raid, reap the spoils, rinse and repeat. Forget Wall Street. The Huns were experts in hostile takeovers, literally. But this wasn't just mindless plunder. Attila had to keep his people loyal, and nothing says loyalty like a share of the loot. The spoils were redistributed, part to his warriors, part to secure alliances with other tribes, and a healthy chunk for himself, because who doesn't like a little fleece-lined coat for those chilly nights on the steppe? Life wasn't all glory and gold, though. Attila's domestic affairs, much like his campaigns, were marked by the occasional squabble. Leading a nomadic empire involved more than just battle strategy. It required managing a complex web of familial and tribal politics. Attila, despite his fearsome reputation, was a man dealing with the same old headaches of leadership. Rival factions, rebellious subordinates, and the occasional unruly brother. Though, as we know, Attila had a unique way of handling sibling rivalry. As for his personal life, Attila wasn't exactly the poster boy for monogamy. Multiple wives were the norm for a Hun leader, and Attila didn't disappoint. His marriages were less about romance and more about political alliances, a strategic game of matrimonial chess where each wife brought a new alliance or strengthened an existing one. It's worth noting, though, that despite the numerous wives, Attila's heart, or whatever passed for one, was a fortress. His true love was power, and every marriage was another stone in his empire's formidable wall. Now, let's peel back the layers on the myth of Attila as a barbarian brute. Despite the image of a man who could crush skulls with a glance, Attila was surprisingly savvy. He surrounded himself with advisors who were well versed in Roman customs, laws, and military tactics. He knew when to wield the sword and when to wield the quill. His understanding of Roman bureaucracy was sharp enough to make any senator sweat, and he wasn't afraid to use this knowledge to his advantage. The logistics of a Hunnic invasion were as complex as a Rube Goldberg machine. From securing the supply lines to coordinating the movements of disparate tribes, Attila's campaigns required a level of strategic planning that would make a military general nod in approval. And while the Huns were known for their speed and mobility, it was Attila's ability to adapt and innovate that truly set him apart. This wasn't just a marauding band of horsemen. It was a mobile empire with Attila at the helm, steering it through the tumultuous waters of 5th century geopolitics. And speaking of geopolitics, it's important to note that Attila's invasions weren't just about land and loot. They were a statement, a flex of power in a world where might often made right. Attila understood the importance of projecting strength and maintaining the perception of invincibility. Each campaign, each skirmish, was a carefully orchestrated spectacle designed to bolster his reputation and keep his enemies on edge. But even a man like Attila couldn't escape the banality of daily life. Between battles, there were the mundane matters of governance, managing resources, settling disputes, and ensuring the wheels of his empire kept turning. It's easy to imagine Attila presiding over a council of warlords, each with their own grievances, ambitions, and demands. The day-to-day realities of leadership were as much a part of Attila's legacy as his military conquests. And then there was the matter of Attila's image. The Romans, with their flair for drama, painted him as the ultimate villain, a barbarian at the gates, an existential threat to the Roman way of life. But like all legends, the truth was more nuanced. Attila was a man of contradictions, a ruthless conqueror with a strategic mind, a leader both feared and admired. His story is a testament to the complexities of power and the delicate dance of diplomacy and warfare. As we delve deeper into Attila's life and legacy, it becomes clear that the man behind the myth was as complex as the times he lived in. Attila's tale is one of ambition and strategy, of love and war, of power and politics. It's a saga that continues to captivate and confound, a story with layers as intricate as the man himself. And as we prepare to turn the page on the next chapter of his life, remember that in history, as in life, the truth is often stranger and far more fascinating than fiction. Now, as we dive into the last act of Attila's life, you might be expecting a grand finale filled with cinematic battles and fiery speeches. But hold onto your helmets, because the curtain falls on this epic saga in a way that would leave any Hollywood director scratching their head. It's 453 AD, and Attila, the scourge of the Romans, the man whose name was whispered with fear in the halls of power, meets an end that's less epic showdown and more tragic sitcom. After a night of celebration to mark his latest nuptials to a young bride named Ildiko, Attila is found dead. Not slain by a valiant foe or struck down by divine wrath, but from what some sources claim was a nosebleed. Yes, you heard that right, a nosebleed. It said he choked on his own blood, a departure so mundane it could almost be a punchline. Historians, however, remain skeptical, suggesting anything from assassination to a ruptured aneurysm. Whatever the cause, it lacks the grandeur one might expect from a man who once held empires in his grip. The immediate aftermath of Attila's death is like the world's most chaotic game of musical chairs. The Hunnic Empire, which had been a finely tuned instrument of war under Attila's iron-fisted rule, suddenly finds itself leaderless. His sons, Elak, Dengizic, and Ernak, scramble to fill the power vacuum, but their attempts are less Game of Thrones and more Three Stooges. The unity that Attila forged through charisma and fear quickly unravels, and the Huns, once the lion of Europe, are reduced to infighting and fragmentation. It's a rapid decline that underscores a harsh truth. An empire built on the ambitions of one man can crumble as quickly as it rose. The political landscape post-Attila is a testament to the impermanence of power. The Huns, once the terror of the Roman world, are soon pushed back into obscurity, their empire disintegrating like a sandcastle at high tide. The Battle of Nedao in 454 AD is a nail in the coffin, where a coalition of Germanic tribes, sensing weakness, rises up and delivers a crushing defeat to the Huns. The empire that Attila built through blood and conquest vanishes almost overnight, a sobering reminder of the transient nature of power. But let's talk legacy, because if there's one thing Attila left behind, it's a story that refuses to fade. For centuries, Attila has been the boogeyman of Europe, a symbol of barbarism and destruction. In medieval chronicles, he's cast as the scourge of God, a divine punishment for the sins of men. And yet, as the centuries roll on, the narrative shifts. By the time we hit the Romantic era, Attila is reimagined as a tragic hero, misunderstood and maligned by history. Wagner's operas and the literature of the time paint him in a more nuanced light, a testament to the human penchant for romanticizing even the most fearsome figures. Attila's legacy is as complex as the man himself. On one hand, he's the embodiment of the barbarian threat, a figure who challenged the might of Rome and nearly brought it to its knees. On the other, he's a leader of unparalleled strategic acumen, a man who united disparate tribes and wielded them like a scalpel against the ancient world's superpowers. His ability to extract tribute from Rome, to negotiate and intimidate in equal measure, speaks to a leader who understood the intricacies of power better than most. Yet, for all his prowess, Attila's story also serves as a cautionary tale. His empire, built on the spoils of war and the charisma of its leader, lacked the institutional framework to survive his death. It's an age-old lesson in leadership. Building a legacy on personality alone is like constructing a house on sand. The moment the tide shifts, it all comes tumbling down. As we wrap up this whirlwind tour of Attila's life, it's worth reflecting on the broader picture. Attila's story is not just about conquest and chaos. It's about the delicate balance of power, the ebb and flow of empires, and the enduring human fascination with figures who defy categorization. History, after all, is not a simple narrative of good versus evil, but a complex tapestry woven from the ambitions, failures, and triumphs of countless individuals. So, as you let the tale of Attila the Hun settle in your mind, remember that history is as much about the stories we tell as the facts we uncover. Attila's legacy, like the man himself, is a blend of myth and reality, a testament to the enduring power of narrative in shaping our understanding of the past. And with that, we've reached the end of our journey through the life of Attila, the scourge of the Romans, a man whose story continues to echo across the ages, long after the dust of his empire has settled.